The day the world bled out didn't look like a movie. It was grey, thin, colourless, like the sky was tired. I was halfway through a shift at the store, watching a woman argue with a self-checkout. Sirens had been a chorus all week, a wall of sound that never quite reached me. Sirens always meant trouble somewhere else. But that day, they were a different key, higher, closer, layered like someone added more and more tracks to a song no one asked for. People were already moving faster. Inventory wasn't scanning, managers were whispering. And my phone was hot with messages, words stacked on top of words. News alerts sprouting like weeds. Quarantine, unknown pathogen, stay indoors. Do not approach the infected, seek shelter, remain calm. The last one is always the funniest. Remain calm, like putting a lid on a boiling pot and hoping the water forgets to rise. I clocked out early. I took the stairs, not the elevator. That choice became a reflex long before I called it a rule. Stairs leave you tired, but they don't strand you between floors when the power goes. I counted steps, another reflex, a way to turn my skull into a metronome. My apartment was on 7, and when I got there I did something very ordinary. I put the key in the door. I twisted. I went in. What wasn't ordinary? I shoved my couch against the door. I filled the tub with water. I turned the fridge to the coldest setting and ate a handful of grapes, standing barefoot on the kitchen tile, like a child afraid of getting caught. I turned on the TV and muted it. I put my phone face down so that the news couldn't see me looking. I sat on the floor with my back to the couch, to the door, to the world, and I listened. From the alley below, a sound like a sack of wet cement hitting the ground. The kind of sound you don't understand until your body decides for you. Don't open the window. Footsteps ran past like a river in flood. Someone shouted, someone screamed, and then quiet, but not empty. Quiet like a mouth holds a secret. I slept a kind of crooked sleep and woke to an apartment that was too bright. The morning was white, hot, and sticky. The power was still on, but the pressure in the pipes stuttered, singing a thin metal song through the walls. On the street, no buses, no hum of early commuters, no delivery trucks. Sirens only. And something else, a chorus of low voices, many at once, like people begging under their breath. I cracked the blinds like an eyelid. Down below, a man stood in the middle of the road with his head tilted toward the sun, as if it might pour into him. He swayed. His shirt was dark with blood down one side, and as I watched, he moved faster than the wound should have allowed, toward a woman who was trying to lift a child from a stroller. Her hands faltered. I closed the blinds and pressed my forehead against them until the sun burned a bright circle in my skin. Rules, I thought. Give me rules. So I started inventing them like you invent a rhythm to keep your feet from tripping. Rule 1, stairs, not elevators. Rule 2, if it locks, lock it. If it moves, listen to it. If it's quiet, ask why. Rule 3, plan your exits while you're still calm. If you wait until your heart is playing drums in your ears, you'll miss the door you need. I made lists with a short pencil I pulled from between couch cushions. I started with water, how to store it, how to purify it. Food, what lasts, what doesn't. Tools, light, battery, map. Then weird things, garbage bags, duct tape, permanent markers, a whistle, heavy gloves. Not because I'd seen a list like it online, those lists were already gone with the towers, but because I was thinking of all the ways a city can turn teeth first. By noon, the power flickered. The TV died, came back, died again, like it was trying to breathe underwater. My phone stayed silent in my hand, a blank little brick that still showed me a picture of a beach, as if the ocean could be folded into my pocket. By dusk, someone pounded on my door. Not a neighbor knock. Heavy, brutal. I froze, pencil suspended above the page. The pounding came again, faster. My couch, my tiny levee, stuttered against the deadbolt. Another voice, farther down the hall, called out something like, "Help," but wrong. Too stretched, too wet. I swallowed and held still. The pounding moved away, a ripple down the corridor, and then a sound like metal tearing, like a group of people moved the wrong way all at once. I wanted to open the door.
I wanted to be the person who did.
But I didn't. I pressed my palm flat on the wood and silently apologized to everyone on the other side of it. The apartment felt small then, the way guilt makes a room shrink, but the guilt softened into another rule. Rule 4, you can't save everyone. You can save yourself. And sometimes that means you'll have to listen while a door becomes a universe you won't cross. I drank a glass of tap water and made myself eat a can of beans cold, because the power was a liar and the fridge would turn on you the first chance it got. I slept with my shoes on and my bag packed at the foot of the bed. In the morning, the power was gone for good. A door is a promise you make to yourself.
Mine weighed as much as my fear did.
I hauled the couch aside and stood with my ear to the wood for a long time, listening to the house breathe, pipes tick, wind scratch.
A far-off thump-thump that could have been the building's heart, or someone running 5 floors below me. I cracked the door.
The hallway was a river of stale air and the smell of spilled detergent and something metallic, maybe blood, maybe rust. A pair of shoes lay on their sides like turtles. A stroller was abandoned against the wall with one wheel bent into an infinity symbol. Down the corridor, Mrs. Patel's door was open. She was 80 if she was a day, bright sari every Tuesday, mint candies on her entry table. Her door had 2 locks, both turned, but the wood had splintered near the handle like someone's shoulder had insisted. I didn't want to think about whose. I slid into the hall and pulled my door nearly closed behind me, leaving the lock not quite engaged.
Always leave yourself a way back.
I held a crowbar in my right hand. It was the only thing in my apartment that explained itself as a weapon without having to ask. My left hand skimmed the wall. I moved slow, heel to toe, like the floor might tattle. At the stairwell, the heavy fire door was blue with a push bar. I cracked it and let the cold breath of the stairwell touch my face. It smelled clean concrete and paint and old gum. Silence that wasn't reassuring, because it felt like something had just stopped moving. I took the stairs down, listening for the way footsteps change, because that's how you tell a person who's thinking from something that isn't. Humans think with their feet. We hesitate at landings, we test doors, we pause to listen. When the infected move, it's as if command skipped the cue and went straight to muscle. You hear it like a grammar mistake. On 4, I heard a scrape from below, a too fast patter, like hands and feet together. I pulled back against the wall, pressed close to the brushed metal banister, and breathed through my nose, counting the inhale, counting the exhale. Down below, a body slung itself around the corner, arms wide like a bad dancer. It moved in bursts, fast then faster, head twitching as if sound hurt. Its shirt had been white once. Its mouth was wrong, too open. It was not Mrs. Patel. I backed up 3 quiet steps. The palm of my hand was slick on the crowbar.
It didn't see me.
It listened, teeth bared, then launched upward, a sprint, sloppy and hungry.
I should have run. I didn't. I stepped to the side as it cleared the landing, and I hooked the crowbar across its shin the way you pull a rug.
It fell forward and skidded on its face, arms continuing to pump as if the ground was a suggestion it chose not to accept. It was close enough that its hair brushed my shoe.
I wasn't brave. I was desperate.
I brought the crowbar down twice, hard, and then I sat on the step with my head between my knees and tried to stitch myself back together with breath. I learned something. Then I would relearn 1,000 times. The first time you do violence, you leave some of yourself on the floor.
That's not a moral.
It's a metric. You count how many pieces you can spare. You don't try to be a hero. You try to be whole enough when you're done to stand up again. I dragged the body into the shadow of the landing. Not because I believed in dignity, though I do, but because anything that looks like someone got fed here Looks like a good place to feed again. I wiped the crowbar on my jeans. The smear didn't come off. It wasn't going to. At the bottom of the stairs, the lobby was a glass box. The street beyond was a smear of metal and colour. Cars stopped in a way that told me the stopping had been violent. The front doors were closed, but one pane had a spiderweb crack starting from eye level, as if it had been headbutted by the sun. Outside, something moved like a hand, twitching in sleep. A person? An echo?
I didn't go out, not yet.
I retreated up, back to 7, back to my door, which sat a little ajar, as if to say, pick a side. In the apartment, I made my bug-out bag into something real. Backpack, check. Water bottle, 2 liters plus purification tablets. Food, nuts, jerky, beans, tuna, chocolate. Tools, multi-tool, knife, not for fighting, for cutting. Crowbar lashed to the side. Duct tape, paracord. Light, headlamp, spare batteries. Fire, lighter, matches. Shelter, space blanket, trash bags, a compact tarp. Clothing, socks. A scarf, gloves. Medicine, painkillers, antibiotics. I didn't know if they'd help, but put in anyway. Bandages, alcohol wipes. Hygiene, soap, toothbrush, feminine products. A small bottle of bleach. Paper maps. A pen. Sharpie. Not because ink can save your life, but because if you leave a note, someone might live from knowing. I wore boots that didn't squeak, jeans that didn't flap, a dark jacket. I pulled my hair up under a cap and cut the tail short with kitchen scissors. The floor took the hair like it was a plant getting fed. I taped a note inside my door with a single piece of duct tape. Avery. Alive. Heading north when safe. Leave a mark at the river. It was a lie and a truth.
I didn't know if I'd go north.
But I wanted to be a person with a direction. When I went back into the hall, I took the stairs again, but slower. The infected at 4 had left a stain, and my footprints smudged through it, small and human and mortal. On the second-floor landing, I heard something new. A radio, thin and tinny, playing a voice that sounded recorded years ago, a public service announcement about brush fires. Someone had it on, in an apartment near the stairwell door, and the door itself had a chair jammed beneath the knob like a child's idea of security. I put my ear to the wood. Behind it, a soft crying. If I knocked, I'd break my own rule. I didn't knock. In the lobby again, I stood with my fingers on the push bar and counted. 1, 2, 3. Life is a series of doors you don't want to open.
Open them anyway. I pushed. The air hit me like a damp towel.
The street was a slow river of smoke and heat, the sun caught in glass fragments that sparkled in a way that made my eyes water. Cars stitched the road in abandoned seams. A bus had died at an angle, like it grew tired of pretending to be a rectangle. Silence was a trick. A block away, a pack of shamblers worked their way down the sidewalk in a loose, drifting school, like fish that forgot how to be a team. A runner flashed between them like a swallowed thought, then vanished into a doorway as if gravity had chosen a different favorite. I stayed low, moved behind cars, checked mirrors for reflections of movement ahead, because mirrors see around corners before you do. I kept to the shadow side of the street.
Sun makes you visible.
Shadow makes you a rumor. I was 3 blocks from the river.
I didn't have a plan beyond the water.
Rivers are boundaries, and boundaries force decisions.
I needed the city to make a decision so I could make mine. On the corner, a newspaper box lay on its back, mouth open.
The headline on the visible page was yesterday's panic rendered as today's archaeology. I ate a square of chocolate I hadn't earned, and let the sugar sharpen my eyes. At the river, the bridge was a jaw clogged with teeth. Cars pressed nose to trunk, a walled mouth. People had tried to walk and had stopped trying. The bridge was a buffet, and the buffet had been closed by something more efficient than hunger. The water below moved with mindless purpose toward a place I couldn't see. It was the most comforting thing I'd seen all day. Rule 5. When in doubt, choose the direction water travels. Gravity has very few opinions, and most of them are correct. I didn't have a boat. I had a body and a bag and a river that was both problem and solution. I followed it along the bank, staying in the brush where the noise from my feet would be eaten by the sound of current. At a bend, I found a cove with a low dock that sagged like an old dog. Tied to a post, with the rope half bitten through by friction and panic, was a canoe the color of moss. If you think of luck as a finite resource, you'll overthink moments like that. Luck isn't a measure of what you deserve. It's a measure of whether your fear and your need arrived in the same place at the same time. I checked the canoe for holes. It had a crack near the bow, patched with duct tape so old it had turned into a fossil. I pushed it into the water, put my bag in the stern as ballast, and slid myself into the middle with a paddle that had a splinter ready to tattoo my palm. On the water, the city changed shapes. It made sense from the river the way backs of paintings make sense, frames and nails and mistakes where the artist started over. I kept the paddle quiet, dipping it like I was apologizing to the current. The bridge loomed ahead, like a bad idea you decide to try anyway. Something fell from it and struck the water far from me, and the splash sounded like a human word. I went under the bridge, close to the pilings, where barnacles and graffiti agreed to share space. It was dark for 3 breaths, and in the dark I heard voices arguing above me, alive,
Angry, desperate, and then I was on the other side.
into sunlight that felt like a deal kept. I aimed for the far bank, where the trees were thicker and the houses thinned.
Movement on the near shore made me throat tight, a shape that stalked instead of stumbled.
A dog, ribs like a xylophone, eyes white with what it had seen. It watched me go with a look I didn't know how to carry. When I reached the far bank, I pulled the canoe up into grass and flipped it. I scraped mud off my boots with a stick, not because the mud mattered, but because the act of cleaning myself felt like an oath I intended to keep. The first night outside the apartment, I found a tool shed behind a house with a lawn that had surrendered. Someone had locked the front door and left the back open, the way we defend our faces and forget our throats. The shed smelled like gasoline and damp rope. I wedged my bag behind a lawnmower and slid myself into the corner, making a nest of heavy tarp and brittle leaves. I set a bell on the doorknob. Okay, it was a set of keys I found on a hook, but I strung them from the handle with cord, so that if anyone opened the door, I'd learn it a second before my lungs did. I slept the way people sleep when they don't trust their beds. Few minutes here, a failure there, and every time I woke I listed the reasons I might need to move and the path I'd take if I did. When morning slid under the door like a thin coin, I lay still and listened.
A far-off engine. Wind on corrugated metal.
Somewhere, a bottle, rolling in the street, the music of it the same here as it had been everywhere, except now the rest of the orchestra was gone. I needed water. Not just the 2 liters in my bag. The future hates heavy things, but a plan for finding it every day, a plan for carrying it, a plan for making it safe. There's an order to survival tasks that I could recite now, even with a fever. Shelter, water, fire, food. In a city, shelter is the first thing the unafraid steal from the careful. Water shows itself but hides in poison. Fire is either a flare that brings company or a secret that keeps you. Food is a rumor until it's in your pocket. I moved with the sun at my back because the human eye reads faces faster than anything. Give people your shadow, not your eyes.
I cut through backyards in a diagonal zig that made me feel feral and anonymous.
I started to talk to myself under my breath, as if I were my own compass. Fence, hedge, break in the hedge, 3 steps to a bird bath. Skip the bird bath because bird baths are sugar bowls for pestilence. Then under the sagging maple limb and hold. This is how you move quiet, by narrating it to yourself until your body believes your voice. Rule 6. Before you enter a space, picture yourself leaving it 3 different ways.
If you can't, don't go in. In the second house I scavenged, I found a basement that still held the smell of last winter.
The chest freezer had gone warm. Freezers turn to rot vaults when the power dies, and they sing about it for months.
I held my breath and opened anyway, just an inch. Not food in there now, not for me. I moved on. I found a pantry that was a shrine to the Sunday before the world broke.
Canned tomatoes lined up like obedient soldiers.
I took 2, not 10.
Leave something for the next person.
Maybe you'll be the next person.
I found a half-empty case of water bottles and left the bottles, but took the box, flattened, and slid into my pack. Because cardboard is insulation, fire starter, and the kind of plate you can throw away without feeling like a thief. On the counter, a note written in a hurry. We tried the bridge. Going to the church, if you get this. The paper was stained with something the color of tea. I put the note in my pocket not because I knew them, but because someone had acknowledged someone, and that felt like a letter addressed to me too. Outside, the wind was a little meaner. Flags on porches hung heavy, reluctant to admit what they meant. Down the block, a crowd of shamblers collected in front of a pharmacy. They were always attracted to places where life had a reason to gather. Grocery stores, hospitals, schools, we congregate. Predators learn the map of our congregations. I wanted inside that pharmacy, like a man dying of thirst wants rain. Antibiotics, antiseptics, painkillers, bandages, all the small things you never let yourself need until you need them all at once. But the front was a glass wound, and behind it, too many shapes. I went around back. The alley was narrow and choked with the detritus that every building grows like a tail. Broken pallets, trash bins, slick cardboard, a tangle of wire. The back door had a key box, one of those realtor lock boxes that open to a code you don't deserve to know.
I could try to break it.
I could try something quieter. I took a piece of rebar from a pile and eased open the maintenance hatch near the ground. The kind of vent you don't think about until you're thinking about everything. Inside, dust.
Farther in, light.
Every building breathed, even the dead ones, and you could crawl through their throats if you were willing to get lungs full of ghosts. I slid into the vent and moved the way you move when your back is a roof and your stomach scrapes the floor. I followed the smell of rubbing alcohol and paper. I dropped from the vent into a stockroom and landed quiet on a stack of flattened cardboard. I paused, listened. Someone moved beyond the door, slow.
I decided to wait.
Don't fight the need to be a statue. Statues are survivors. After a full minute, my hearing adjusted and told me more. Several someones, not quite synced, a shuffle with no punctuation. I cracked the door and saw arms reaching from behind a shelf like a bad magic trick. They had come in when the front glass broke and found themselves stuck behind displays. They reached because reaching is what's left when you forget everything but the hunger that wears your name. I worked quick. I took a backpack from behind the register, the kind kids fill with pens and hopes. I filled it with gauze, tape, cloth scissors, antiseptic, saline wash, a stapler for wounds, just in case I forgot what gentleness meant, and gloves, boxes and boxes of them, because the future's hands are dirty and yours should not be. I found antibiotics by reading labels with calm I didn't have. Amoxicillin, doxycycline, ciprofloxacin. I didn't know doses beyond what I had remembered from a neighbor's ear infection a lifetime ago. But something is better than nothing when infections go wild. On the way out, I saw a note pinned to a corkboard behind the staff door. In case of emergency, prop back door with wedge.
Alarm disabled. The wedge sat under the board like a joke. I took it.
Wedges turn doors into your accomplices. Back outside, I moved again along the river because water shapes survival. I picked a 3-story building near the bank with one way in and a fire escape that zigzagged up the side like a ladder someone drew in a hurry. I went up halfway and hauled the ladder up after me, my arms shaking the way they used to after carrying groceries up 7 flights. On the second-floor landing, I settled on a square of concrete that looked out at the Silver River. I ate an apple from a tree behind a fence I didn't hop but could have, and I stared at the current until my eyes went soft. Rule 7. Reward yourself for being alive, even if it's with an apple you didn't earn. Small joys teach your body that survival is more than maintenance. Night came like a curtain pulled without ceremony. Lights that used to spark on in windows stayed dark and honest. The stars, rare in cities, returned with their old arrogance. Somewhere in the distance, a new sound, a generator, coughing itself awake.
I let myself wish for the first time, not for before.
For a place with walls that held and a roof that forgave rain. I fell asleep with my head on my bag and my hand on the crowbar and dreamed that the river stood up and walked away. Chapter 4. Water, Fire, Quiet. There's a temptation to think danger sleeps when the sun does.
It doesn't, it just changes boots.
Night brought out the runners with a kind of manic grace, as if the dark loosened their joints. It also brought quiet, and quiet is a resource you can spend. I woke before dawn and watched the sky remember how to be blue. The river was a black ribbon for a while, then a grey band, then silver. Today's tasks: water, fire, a better sleeping spot. I climbed down the fire escape and left the ladder up, a promise to myself I intended to keep. I moved along the riverbank until I found a storm drain emptying into water with a little bit of force and a smell I wished was less honest. I used cloth from a shirt I'd cut into squares to pre-filter it, tied the cloth over the mouth of my bottle, filled slowly. The river peered at me with no judgment. After, I dropped purification tablets into the bottles and waited like a patient person. I lit my tiny stove, an alcohol burner I'd improvised with a tuna can and holes punched with a nail, fed with the last of some rubbing alcohol. I boiled water even after the tabs had done their work, because redundancy is the religion of survival. Double dead is dead for sure, and double clean is cleaner still. Rule 8. 2 is 1. 1 is none. Always have a backup method. Boil and treat. Lock and wedge. Shelter and escape. Fire attracts. Short flames, short time. I kept the flames small, the pot covered, my body a shield between the heat and the world. The smell of coffee is a poem about civilization, but I didn't have coffee. I had water, hot and honest, and I sipped it like a promise. I scouted for a place to sleep that night that wasn't a blank, concrete tongue. Abandoned buildings are either traps or gifts, and the line between them is thin and moves when you're not looking. I looked for a place with 3 walls and no fourth, something I could close with a tarp and a rope, something high enough to discourage casual wandering. I found a half-collapsed garage with a roof that still kept a corner dry. I swept out glass with a rake I found and made a bed out of cardboard layered like scales, then tarp, then blanket. If you've never slept on cardboard, you don't know the genius of corrugation. It holds a little air between you and the concrete. Air is the kind of friend who keeps a secret for you without having to be asked. In the afternoon, a small storm rumbled in, and the city took a deep breath that smelled like wet iron. I used the rain to wash. Not a full wash, that's a luxury I'd forgotten the words for, but hands, face, neck.
I used the bleach diluted to the color of a ghost to clean my knife and the handles of my tools. Infection doesn't care about your courage. That evening, while the sky still had light to spend, I practiced something that didn't feel like survival, but was. I read out loud. Not a book, I didn't have one yet, but the words on packaging.
Ingredients: water, sodium chloride, dextrose. My voice sounded thin at first, embarrassed to exist. Then it warmed. Legal disclaimers on a tarp became an epic. A faded warning, do not ingest, became a love poem to all the foolishness I might yet avoid. Speaking is a human skill.
Use it or it dwindles.
When you do meet someone again, you don't want your mouth to be a locked door. Near dusk, with the light disintegrating into orange confetti, I heard something that brought me to one knee. A voice on a radio. Not my radio. A voice floating across the water from the far bank, amplified by humidity and hope. It was broken, half static, but clear enough to be not a hallucination. North Ridge, intake, every third day, night signal. I recorded the words into my little red eye. North Ridge, intake, every third day.
Night signal. I said them like I was turning a key in a lock. I didn't trust the voice. I didn't distrust it.
I wrote it down, circled it, underlined it, then put the paper where I'd see it when I woke. Rule 9. Believe in the possibility of a plan while treating all plans like rumors until proved. Hope is fuel. Proof is map. I slept a little hard and dreamed I was walking up a staircase made of river. In the dream, every step I took flowed away behind me, and if I turned to check, there was nothing there but wet stone. When I woke, the air had cooled against my face, the cardboard under me had softened to my shape, and the river lied in the way only water can, promising to be the same thing tomorrow while knowing it won't. I packed my bag. I checked my laces. I checked the sky like it was a set of instructions. I took one last look at the garage that had been my palace for one night and left a mark on the wall near the door. A symbol I made up, a triangle with a dot in the middle, meaning safe for one night. We need to learn each other's languages again. I suppose I was starting a dialect of one. I moved north because the voice said north, and because north is where maps keep their pride.
I moved quiet. I moved the way an apology moves. I moved like I was learning to dance with a partner who might decide to bite.
Morning came as a gradual apology. The river wore a shawl of mist that thinned while I watched, and the light arrived sideways through cottonwood leaves, touching the water in bright coins that slid off the surface as if the day was trying to pay me for staying alive.
I packed quiet.
I put my palm on the cold concrete where I'd slept and thanked it out loud for being a
floor that didn't give me away. North, the radio voice had given me a
breadcrumb, North Ridge, and I followed the water, because water writes the simplest sentences a landscape can speak. The bank changed under my boots from sand to mud to brittle weed, then to asphalt where the river ran shoulder to shoulder with a paved path. Once people had come here to run off their soft edges and pretend the city held them kindly. Now it was a corridor that learned to swallow sound. A pillar of smoke rose somewhere ahead, thin and straight, fresh. When wood burns wet, it sulks and crawls along the ground. When something else burns, it tends to be impatient and arrogant, aiming straight for God. This was the latter. I crouched in the shadow of a walnut tree and watched the column for a count of 60. A breeze took a bite out of it and put it back together again. If I went to look, I'd learn something. If I went to look, I might also be the something someone else learned. Rule 10, people are the variable.
Zombies are a math problem.
People are calculus. Treat every human as both solution and unknown until proven otherwise. I gave the smoke a wide berth, cut inland through a spill of backyards, and let my body choose the path by where the ground felt used. The world wears grooves from habit. We make deer trails and alley shortcuts and desire paths across green places that say no. I learned to look for them and follow. In the third yard I crossed, behind a fence that had given up trying to stand straight. I found a bicycle under a heap of tarp and leaf. It had a basket wired to the front and a bell shaped like a stubborn sunflower. It also had a flat front tire and a chain with more rust than shine. I looked at it and pictured miles falling off my day like scales. I pictured, too, my noise, my shape on the path, my silhouette becoming worth attention. Rule 11. Wheels buy miles and sell silence. If you take one, know what you're paying. The garage door was stuck 3 feet up, but light filtered into a dim cave of tools, boxes, and the smell of old oil.
Inside, a pegboard.
Someone had been precise here. A hammer lived where the pencil outline of a hammer said it should. On a shelf, a plastic box with a cracked lid.
Inside, a tube of glue, a handful of patches, sandpaper, 3 tire levers like question marks.
Bicycle triage. The front tube had a slit like a grin. I sanded the rubber carefully, glued, pressed the patch, held still while I counted to 60. I used a hand pump that grumbled but worked, and I watched the tire regain its shape like a lung inflating. While I worked, a radio somewhere nearby coughed up a handful of syllables and died. Sound has a way of rolling along flat streets.
I froze, glue on my fingers drying to a shine.
The words were just air now. I finished the tire and spun the wheel. It wobbled a little. Good enough. I stripped the bell.
Charming is dangerous.
I cut a strip from an old T-shirt and tied up the metal basket so it wouldn't rattle when I hit broken pieces of the world. I pushed the bike before I rode it, testing noise, testing balance.
Every squeak told me where to be gentle.
I greased the chain with the smallest breath of oil. The first click of the freewheel nearly undid me with nostalgia. I pressed the sensation into my pocket and didn't look at it again. I kept the river on my right and the sun over my left shoulder as the morning matured. When the path narrowed, I got off and walked. When it widened and the corners opened their masks, I coasted. The wind on my face was a message from before. My body wanted to write back. I let it a little. I cut behind a storage facility with orange doors like a row of warnings. The fence was topped with coils that would chew skin.
I didn't need inside.
The path dipped under a road, and the tunnel sang with dripping water and the echo of my tires. I dismounted, walked the tunnel, and listened to the stone tell me it had held more noise than this, and didn't mind. On the other side, not far, a cul-de-sac held the skeleton of a party, the collapsing tent of an impromptu market. Coolers turned over, a folding table with a leg bent, and a smear that could have been barbecue sauce if I decided to be merciful. A hand-painted sign leaned against a mailbox. Trade, water, tools, meds. Under it, smaller, in a different hand, no guns. Farther down, graffiti on the curb. No mercy. The 2 sentences argued across 10 yards of concrete. Guess who won? I moved through slow. Paper fluttered around my ankles like ashamed birds.
I took nothing.
You learn the shape of a trap by studying the bait. Nothing here was for me. It was for the version of me who wants a crowd and a bargain more than he wants a pulse. I hid the bike under a dogwood in a yard with a broken swing and crossed toward the smoke. The closer I got, the more it thinned, as if some decision had ended. The fire was a car that had burned hot and was now black, ash around it like a circle drawn by a giant's finger. The shopping bags in the trunk had melted into a sheet of tangled plastic. Nobody. That didn't mean no eyes. I backed out slow, tracks careful, placed footprints where footprints already existed, rewinding someone else's path as if I could make their day unhappen. By noon, the river had made up its mind to swing near a small floodplain and then tuck back toward the city. I stayed with it and ate 2 fingers of jerky and half an apple and a chunk of cheese that had softened into something almost indecent.
Salt, sweet, fat. Fuel is fuel.
Joy is extra, and sometimes you get both if you sit still long enough to tell the difference. I cut inland around a tangle of fallen trees and found myself behind a row of townhouses, doors with welcome mats that said "Go away" in the language of dust. A child's bike lay on its side with one wheel spinning slow, the way wheels always seem to spin in stories when nobody is around to make them.
I knelt to stop it.
It kept moving. My hand was shaking. Foot care feels boring until it decides to become everything. My heel had started to build a hot spot from the new pressure of the pedal. I sat on a stoop, took off my boot, and pressed a hand to the skin. Not yet blister, but almost. Rule 12. Guard your feet like the rest of you depends on them. It does. treat hot spots before they vote to become blisters. I dried the skin, cut a strip from my roll of tape, and covered the tenderness, smoothing it down with a thumb. I changed socks. That act, small as it was, felt like someone laying a cool hand on my forehead when I was a kid with a fever.
Keep your rituals.
Survival is a religion with many small prayers. I rode until the afternoon angled gold and the shadows lengthened into something with edges. Ahead, a barn slouched low by the river with a roof that had lost an argument with wind. Beside it, a farmhouse with shutters like eyelashes. I cached the bike in a tangle of blackberry canes and went in soft. The barn was better than it looked. The loft held hay that kept its dignity and a corner where wind didn't find me. I made a nest, cardboard first, then tarp, then the thin blanket that kept becoming a different kind of friend depending on what I asked of it. I strung a line from one beam to another and hung a small square of dark cloth at the loft's edge. At night, if I needed to look, I'd look from behind it.
Light discipline is a language.
Don't speak it loudly. I found a ladder and a view slot where a board had cracked.
Through it, twilight.
In the distance, the ghost of downtown made a jagged horizon. Closer, the river turned its slow trick of wrinkling a copy of the sky and handing it back. I was about to settle in when a gunshot popped from far away. Not a fast volley, not a managed rhythm, just one lonely punctuation mark that didn't belong. Sound travels twice at dusk, once through air, once along nerves. I waited, counting breaths.
A second shot.
Then quiet, so complete that the insects were a crowd again, and the river forgot the conversation. Rule 13. 1 gunshot means trouble. 2 means decision. 3 means commitment. If it's not you shooting, none of it is your conversation. I crawled backwards slowly, made myself small, and let my heart do as it pleased without giving it permission to tell my feet what to do. After a while, night stepped over the fence. I watched the north sky for the signal I'd half heard and half invented. Stars came out like a familiar story told by someone with a new voice. The horizon held itself still, and then, an hour after full dark, a blink. Not lightning.
Not airplane.
Too deliberate? 2 short pulses, a pause, 1 longer, a pause, and then nothing. 10 minutes. Repeat. The pattern held 3 times, then went away like a password spoken into a keyhole. I traced the line from the barn to the point on the sky where the light had appeared and marked it on my map with a fingernail indentation. North-northwest. A ridge is a spine.
Spines curve. I slept in slices.
My dreams were a picture book bound together wrong, the pages out of order. On one page, my apartment door bending inward.
On another, the river lifting me like a crowd at a concert and carrying me over a railing into the air. Always in the margins, a red light blinking.
The recorder's small eye reminding me there is a version of me outside my skull. In the morning, fog lay on the fields like a misplaced blanket. The barn sighed when I climbed down, wood settling in its sleep. I retrieved the bike and rolled it back onto the path. The day was bright, but not hot yet. A clean coin of sun, the sky rinsed. In towns where the electricity has died, churches become maps.
Even if you don't belong to their language, their roofs point to a center.
Their crosses slice the sky into coordinates. Their bells, if they have them, give you a measure of distance if anyone forgets how loud they are.
I scanned the horizon till I found a steeple.
It leaned a little, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I approached from the back, through a cemetery that had grass whipped sideways by wind and names I didn't read. The church door was propped open with a rain barrel.
Inside, cool air clung to the stone.
Candles had burned here recently. Wax on the altar cloth like tears, a cluster of stubs on a table by a statue of a sorrowing saint. The scent tugged at something behind my eyes that wasn't faith, so much as the memory of rooms where voices were allowed to be soft. The nave held an organized mess. Pews had been pushed aside to make room for pallets of blankets, crates of canned goods, a jumble of bottled water, a stack of paper plates. On the far wall, hand-lettered signs, "Take what you need, no more than you can carry, sign in," and beside a clipboard with a limp pen, a calendar. Every third day was circled in red. The words North Ridge were written along the top of the month in blocky letters, so determined they looked carved. I stood with my hand on the calendar for longer than makes sense. You forget when you stop seeing them how much a box with numbers in it can brace a person. Time makes a kind of shelter if you let it. The sacristy smelled like old flowers and laundry soap. The office held a corkboard with flyers for winter coat drives that would never happen, and a sheet of frequencies pinned up with 3 identical thumbtacks, 146.520, 462.5625, 121.5. Someone with ham radio on the brain had lived here. I followed a tangle of coax cable like a trail of yarn to a back room. On a table, a handheld radio, scuffed and taped, the antenna an unassuming black whip. Beside it, a car battery and a solar panel perched in the window like a domestic plant. I touched the radio like it might bite. I checked the charge with a multimeter I found under the table. Enough. I listened, just listened, while the static made the soft shush of a far ocean. I clicked through the frequencies listed. It's not the movies. You don't turn a dial and hear your missing person breathing your name. You hear silence that changes flavor.
On one frequency, squelch cracked as if something far away was clearing its throat and changing its mind. I keyed the mic once and didn't talk.
Then I put it down. The words you say on a radio become a flag you can't unwave. Not today. On the bulletin board, just inside the nave, was a paper covered in symbols, simple shapes with meaning handwritten beside them, a traveller's shorthand. A circle with 3 lines out, water here.
A square with a slash, unsafe.
A triangle with a dot inside, safe to sleep once.
I smiled, small involuntary.
My symbol had been born twice. I took a candle and a box of matches and left 3 cans of beans and a jar of peanut butter on the table, an exchange as fair as I could make it. I stood at the back of the sanctuary and looked up at the ceiling, the way your eyes want to, and saw spiderwebs knitted between beams like lace. A bell rope hung just inside the side door. It had been tied off so no one did anything foolish by reflex. A sound in the narthex made me freeze, nails clicking on tile. My body arranged itself around my lungs, ready to make excuses for the noise they wanted to make. A dog, ribs a map beneath a coat that had forgotten luster, stepped forward. A tag on a collar jangled. The dog froze at the sound too and looked as if ready to apologize for existing. I lowered myself to a knee slow. I set a piece of jerky on the floor and backed my hand away. The dog watched me as if I were a math problem with too many variables, then stepped forward and ate the offering with a gentleness that undid me more than hunger ever could. "Hey," I said, soft. My voice surprised us both. "You got a name?" The tag said Mace on one side and a phone number on the other that might as well have been a spell in a dead language. I wrapped the tag with a strip of cloth until it didn't jingle.
Mace let me.
When I reached for the collar, the dog flinched and then decided I hadn't been mean. Trust is a finite resource. I rationed mine and didn't ask the dog to spend all of theirs at once. Rule 14. Sound discipline includes your friends. Quiet their tags, their pockets, your zippers. Noise is a kind of scent, and everything hungry can smell it. I led Mace to the back with a gesture, and to my surprise, they followed. I set out a small bowl of water. The way the dog drank was a prayer I've said myself on long days. I let them finish and then let them choose, stay or go. They stayed, curled behind a pile of church-donated coats like a comma resting, making my sentence feel less abrupt. I felt the air inside the room change, a little warmer from the permission of another breathing thing.
I didn't know if I'd keep the dog.
Maybe the dog would keep me. At dusk, I carried my pack and the radio up into the bell tower. The stairs complained the way wood does when you ask it to remember how to hold weight. Through the slats, the whole town lay in a collage, straight streets, the river curling like a kindness, the fields beyond already swallowing the day. The bell hung on its beam like a giant's idea of jewelry. It had a sound in it waiting, but I didn't touch it. I propped the radio just inside the shade where a sliver of sky was visible to its little black ear. I watched the horizon where last night the signal had blinked. The night arrived properly this time, not rushed. Stars wrote vowels on the sky. The dog settled at my feet and snored a little, a noise so domestic that for a second I saw my old couch and its lumpy pillows and felt my back not ache. The light again. Two short, a pause, one long. It cut through the dark in a way that felt like someone snapping fingers across a crowded room to get my attention without calling my name. This time, after the third repetition, a fourth, long, then gone.
A signature, a stamp. I held my breath like that would make me better at seeing.
It didn't. After, the radio muttered a burst of something that might have been voice run through gravel. I didn't talk. I recorded the pattern on the little red eye, said it out loud to make it real, and drew it in the margin of the church calendar beside the third day circle. If intakes happened every third, then tonight's was a whisper of proof, or a trap, or both. The hardest truths arrive with more than one handle. I slept in the tower with my back to the wall and woke to the soft burr of Mace's breath and the pink rim of morning edging the roofs. I've forgotten what it felt like to be responsible for another creature that wasn't my own weak will.
It anchored me.
It also turned every decision into a double one. We went down the stairs, careful. At the bottom, I found a crate labelled First Aid. Inside, a shrink-wrapped foil blanket, gauze tape, a tiny bottle of iodine with a dropper, and a card with instructions on treating shock. As if the world as a whole could be convinced to lie down and put its feet up. I left a note on the corkboard. Another small square of truth. Avery, passed through northbound, saw the night signal. Left supplies on the table. If you read this, mark a triangle with a dot, if safe. I drew my symbol again, beneath the note, like a signature learned in a new alphabet. As I stepped into the morning, Mace pressed a nose to my knee and looked up for instruction.
I hadn't intended to be chosen. I also hadn't intended to say no to being needed. All right, I said.
But we have to go quiet, Mace wagged, a small economy of joy. We went out into the day together, two shadows bending toward the river and then following it toward the idea of a ridge we couldn't yet see. The river tucked behind a sliver of industry, a place where once trains had brought in raw materials and hauled away something finished. Now the only finishing happening was silence completing its work. Rails slice through cities like arteries, and everything near them is designed for movement and noise. Take away the noise and it becomes a museum of absence. That's useful if you treat it right. It's deadly if you don't. Ballast rock underfoot is treacherous. It looks stable and acts like marbles stacked on one another. I lifted the bike by the handlebars and walked the ties, placing my feet on wood, not the loose stones between. Mace picked their way with the caution of someone who expects the ground to sometimes lie. The smell of creosote was the smell of summer afternoons I didn't think about anymore. Hot tar, sun-baked steel, the taste of dust. A wind lifted grit into my teeth and made a sound in the power lines like ghosts arguing. The yard opened on my left, boxcars idling forever, their graffiti a washed-out gallery. A maintenance shed slumped under the weight of pigeons gossiping about a world that had forgotten them. Offices with broken windows stared out hollow. On a chain-link fence, a sign still tried, "Authorized personnel only." I was not authorized. I went anyway. Rule 15. Big spaces make you feel small. Small spaces make you feel trapped. Neither is a measure of safety. Choose the spaces where your ears work best and your eyes reach far enough to give your feet time. We moved along the shadow of a long car branded with a name that meant nothing now. I kept one hand on its metal skin, my palm cooling. Between two cars, a gap offered a view into the main yard.
I crouched.
Across the expanse, movement, not the shambling randomness of infected, but purposeful, cautious. Two figures low to the ground, moving from cover to cover with military thrift. People. My fingers tightened involuntarily on the bike grip. Mace made a tiny sound like a question. I gave a palm-down gesture. The dog, brilliant as instinct, froze. The two humans disappeared behind a stack of pallets. I waited more. Patience is a tool with an edge. You cut your options open with it and see what's inside. When they reappeared, they held a third person between them, a drag more than a carry. The third person's leg was wrapped in something red. They moved without looking up. Not the first time they'd done this. My heart made an argument that wasn't helpful. Rule to 16, when you see people moving like a team, you're looking at a story that started before you arrived. Don't imagine you can write yourself into the next chapter without paying. I retreated as careful as a burglar, leaving a house he decided not to rob. Mace and I looped behind a maintenance building. Inside, the air was heavy with oil. Tools hung from racks in an order that said someone cared about systems. I found a pair of work gloves in a drawer and took them. I found an orange safety vest and left it. Bright makes you plenty of things. Safe isn't one of them. On a steel desk, a rail yard map lay under glass, covered in grease pencil notes, track numbers, switch repairs, a circle around a rusted water tower with the words "Don't go alone" scrawled in a hand that didn't waste letters. I traced the line of the main tracks and found a spur that crossed a narrow creek and then ran parallel to a chain of warehouses before aiming back toward the river. I memorized that curve and the way the water under the bridge looked, the pattern of broken boards on the handrail, a missing plank like a crooked tooth. We moved again, cautious. At the creek, a roar of frogs greeted us like an audience. I knelt and refilled a bottle through my cloth filter, added tablets, and waited. I offered Mace water from a collapsible bowl. Mace drank and then looked out across the brush, ears forward. I listened with the dog, my mouth open a little to let another sense in. A rustle, then stillness. The wind twisting in the brush again. Not everything that moves is menace, but treat every maybe as if it could be. On the far side, an office with a door kicked in held a couch so vile it felt like a dare. I stripped a thin blanket from a pile, shook it, and it released a flurry of dust motes like a small weather system. I turned to leave and felt the blister on my heel announce itself as no longer hypothetical.
I sat on the floor, boot off, sock off, and looked at the damage.
A bubble of skin that wanted to become a story I didn't have time to read. I cleaned it with a little iodine, watched the amber bloom into the pale skin. I drained the blister with a sterile needle, pressed the fluid out with a clean square of gauze, and taped it into submission. Beneath the tape, my heel felt like a secret I needed to protect. I cut a donut of foam from the packaging inside a toolkit and taped it around the taped blister, relieving pressure where the shoe would demand it. Mace watched with the seriousness dogs reserve for the moment you decide if you are going to cry or not. I didn't. Rule 17, treat injuries early and cheap. Small becomes big if you feed it neglect. Pain is a bill. Pay in pennies when you can. Back on the tracks, a sound like beads spilled across tile, gravel disturbed. We ducked behind a low wall of stacked ties. A cluster of infected moved through the gap we'd just crossed, 6 or 7, drawn by a noise I hadn't heard or a smell the wind had reassigned to us. Their heads made the uncanny stuttering angles of disruption. One wore a high-visibility vest, the kind I'd left behind. Bright, as it turned out, was a uniform of the dead as well as the living. I held my breath until the urge to inhale became a drumbeat in my ribs. Then I took in air, slow and thin through my nose. Mace pressed against my calf and didn't make a sound. I put a hand on their back, and felt the tremor of discipline. One of the infected paused, listening. Its ears, or what's left of the human help that ears give, cocked toward the sound of a train that would never come. It took a step, then another, then peeled away, bored by our stillness. Sometimes the floor really is lava. Sometimes your body heat is the only flare you need to extinguish. We waited a count of 200, then moved. Past the yard, the tracks became less domesticated. We passed under a highway where Ivy had decided to declare victory. On a pillar, someone had painted 3 arrows pointing northwest.
I didn't trust signs. I also didn't ignore them.
Farther on, the spur I had traced on the map rejoined the main line, and beyond that, warehouse loading bays yawned like mouths. One bay had a door pulled down to a foot above the ground, enough for a person to duck. The dust beneath it had been disturbed recently. Boots, smaller prints, a wagon wheel, an economy built from leftover parts. I crouched and peered in. Dark! The kind that scares children and professionals equally. I clicked the headlamp to its dimmest mode, cupped it in my hand, and slid under. The warehouse held rows of shelves like narrow city blocks. The aisles were canyons. Someone had cleaned this place out with method and time, boxes opened, contents removed, or neatly stacked on pallets. On one shelf, faded backpacks with cartoon characters that now seemed like jokes. On another, office supplies that felt obscene in their normalcy, reams of paper half-wrapped, binders, a 5-gallon water cooler jug, empty. One corner had been claimed, a circle of pallets, a carpet remnant, a pile of blankets, a bucket. The smell told an honest story. Sweat, food, bleach, fear. A note tacked to a post with a bolt said, "Gone to Ridge, 3rd day. If you can catch us, do. If you can't, don't die." Under it, a drawing of the horizon with a ridge and a notch, and an arrow pointing at the notch. It was a child's drawing with an adult's hand guiding the lines. I folded the note and put it in my bag. On the way out, I passed a rack of reflective triangles, the kind you put behind a car on the shoulder. I took one, wrapped in its case.
Not for wearing.
For setting behind us if we needed someone to follow without telling them exactly where we were. Breadcrumbs you can erase. We pushed back out into light, and the day poked me with the fact of afternoon. The air heavy, my body a little slow from the quiet terror of the warehouse.
I needed shade and food and an hour where nothing wanted anything from me. Beyond the warehouses lay a strip of scrub, and then the river again, reliable as a friend you don't have to entertain.
I found a stand of willows whose roots made a cheap chair. I ate nuts and dried fruit and a piece of chewy bread that tasted like memory and dust. Mace fell asleep with their chin on my boot, a posture of trust that made my breath hiccup with an emotion I refused to name yet. That's when I heard it, a cough that wasn't a cough, human, close enough to be a decision. "Stay," I whispered. The dog's ears flicked. I palmed the crowbar and moved along the willow bank with the creeping walk that made me feel ridiculous and saved my life. The cough again, a stutter wheeze. I followed the sound to a drainage ditch where a culvert cut under the old road. In the mouth of it, half in light and half in shade, sat a person with their back against rusted corrugation, one leg extended, the other pulled up. Their hair was shaved close to the scalp. Their hands were empty, palms open on their thighs. "I hear you," the person said, before I could speak. Their voice was sanded down, throat raw. "Not here for trouble. Who is?" My voice came out softer than I wanted. The red eye was in my pocket, recording anyway. This habit of mine, this witness. The person smiled with a corner of their mouth. "Everyone." I let myself move into their line of sight slowly. They took me in the way I was taking them in. Boots, knees, hands, eyes. No immediate weapon. No pack easy to see, which was either caution or loss. Their left sleeve was cut away, and the forearm was bandaged with a strip of flannel.
I sat on my heels a safe distance away. "I'm Avery," I said. Names didn't matter, and they did.
I'm moving north, they nodded, as if that explained more about me than my face.
"Kit," they said.
The name fit them, compact, practical, maybe not the one they were born with.
I was moving north.
Then I wasn't. Can I look at that? I nodded toward the bandage. You can look. You can't touch. The words were matter of fact, not unkind. Promise I won't be offended. Fair. I shifted on my heels to get a better angle without breaking the space between us. The bandage had been wrapped with care. The edges were clean.
No seep had bled through.
The skin above it looked normal. The smell was only sweat. Infection has a scent. This wound didn't speak it loudly.
"What happened?"
Fence, Kit said, and gestured toward the chain link above the ditch. It bowed inward where someone had decided to go through rather than over. Went under. Metal. Bit back. They didn't say, because I was moving too fast, because I was scared, because time is a predator that makes prey clumsy. They didn't have to.
"I've been those things. I was those things. Can I toss you a bottle?"
I asked. Kit considered, then nodded. I threw underhand, slow. They caught it like someone who had played that game with a person who stood on the other end of a backyard and loved them. They opened it and drank like it was permission. Techniques change when you watch thirst handled. They wiped the rim with the inside of their shirt and set it next to them. "You're alone?"
I asked, for now. Kit's face didn't twitch.
"I can go another day without help.
Maybe 2.
After that, I'll be a different kind of problem." "Who are you with?" Kit's eyes flicked past me, scanning, a habit that made an anchor in my respect for them. People who thought they were a family. Some are. Some like the word without the work. We made it 2 towns north. Then we did the hungry math. The what?
How many mouths? How many cans?
How many hands? How many plans?
How many nights before someone does something stupid because the dark is louder than the rules? They tipped their chin at my crowbar.
You got rules.
I can tell. You'd be surprised what you can invent when you run out of other people's sentences. Kit smiled with their eyes this time.
Northridge? You heard it?
Heard it. Someone came through a day ahead of me.
Left a symbol on the asphalt by the underpass. Triangle with a dot. Said you could sleep there if you didn't take too long about it. They paused.
That you?
I let a laugh out, small. Might be. You traveling on the intake schedule? Kit shook their head. Wasn't sure it was real until I saw the light. Thought it might be raiders making a bucket out of hope. Still might be. The honesty tasted like salt.
You got food?
Kit tilted a small satchel I hadn't noticed. It sagged.
Peanut butter and judgment. I stood slow and stepped back.
I'm going to leave a can and a bandage here. I set them down, then retreated to the distance again. Mace padded over, curious, and sat down, and looked at Kit with a seriousness that made Kit smile full this time. You got a friend? Kit said. Temporary, I said. We're negotiating terms, Kit nodded solemnly. I'll try not to mess up the contract. We stayed like that a while, a triangle of wariness and something not unlike trust, all of us listening hard to the world to make sure it wasn't changing plans without us. After a time, I said what I'd been deciding. If you want to travel, we can move with space between. Kit's head tilted. What are your rules? 10 meters between us on open ground, I said, and it felt like drafting a treaty. If one of us runs, the other doesn't follow into a place they didn't choose. We share food only when we decide to. If one of us is bitten or sick, they say it out loud. We don't sleep on the same side of a door. We stop for the night before we can't see our own feet. Kit counted the points on their fingers. What about fights?
Between us?
Or with the world? Between us, we table arguments until a place we can argue without dying. With the world, we decide fast, and we accept that we'll be wrong sometimes. If we have to split, we do it on purpose, not as a surprise. Kit looked at me with an appraisal that felt like a porch light going on. You've thought about this? I've had a few empty evenings, I said. Rule 18. Agreements made in calm, save lives in noise. Say the rules out loud.
Make them boring.
Boring is safe. We moved. Kit stood with care, tested weight on the injured leg, and didn't lie with their face when it hurt. That counted for a lot. We took the chain link fence in the spot they'd broken already, widening it, choosing that noise over another noise we didn't know. On the other side, the track bed rose, and the river beyond glinted like it was in on the joke. Kit walked with a limp, so stubborn it made me want to carry them. That wasn't an option we'd agreed to, now or ever. The space between us had to be a space we chose, not a void filled with my hero fantasies. I took the front, Mace trotted midfield, and Kit held the rear. We moved through a quiet neighborhood that had learned new rules. Windows wore blankets like eyelids. Cars with flat tires had notes tucked under wipers. Some were messages like mine, names, arrows, promises. Some were apologies. One was just one word, written in heavy marker with a broken heart drawn as if a child had taken the pen. Sorry. On a corner, a little library sat on a post, its plexiglass door cracked, a handful of books inside. A battered copy of a survival novel that had lied to me when I was 16, a dog-eared cookbook, a children's book with an elephant on the cover.
I took the cookbook.
Anything you can learn about making something from nearly nothing is a song in a language you'll need to sing. We paused in the shade of an ash tree and watched a small group of infected move down the block, drawn toward the sound of something I couldn't place, a clatter, a patience, breaking. Their gait was the jerky impatience of marionettes whose strings were tangled. Kit whisper-counted without thinking. 7. We waited for them to move on and made ourselves smaller than we were. In times like that, you can look at your hands and see how large they are. The urge to tuck your fingers into your palms is strong. Don't. You might need those fingers to catch yourself if you fall. We reached the river again as afternoon leaned toward evening. Across the water, a line of hills had developed a backbone. You couldn't call it a ridge yet, not with confidence, but your body knew the day was pushing you toward higher ground. The air cooled in a way that suggested night was a project already in progress. We found a place to hole up, a service building at the edge of a defunct water treatment plant. Concrete and angles, one door, 2 small windows, roof intact. The door hung crooked. I propped it with the wedge I'd taken from the pharmacy and tied a line from the handle to my wrist with slack enough for sleep, but not enough to make ignoring a visitor an option. Kit took the far side by the other window and stacked cinder blocks in a neat, queer defense like a kid making a fort with pillows. Mace circled twice, lay down in the middle, and put their chin on their paws with the weariness of someone consenting to rest because someone else had decided to be the wall. We ate in silence, not from lack of words, but because the day had spoken all the sentences it needed. After a while, Kit said, "You gonna try the radio?" I shook my head. "Not yet."
Light first. I glanced out through the high window where a slice of horizon was visible between 2 shoulders of black.
The last of the sun was a stubborn line. Then it surrendered. I climbed the concrete steps to the roof, slow and deliberate, the radio clipped to my belt, the antenna an exclamation point that reminded the night I had questions. Kit stayed below. We decided that much without needing to say it. One person exposed. One person ready, the sky pooled its stars.
Old constellations wore new names in my head.
I traced the rim of the hills from left to right and found the notch the note had sketched. 10 minutes became a long time when you were waiting for a blink. I counted a slow 100 once, twice. Then the light, 2 short, 1 long, a pause, and then the signature, the long tail that felt like a wink. Again, I whispered to nobody.
Again. And it did.
I timed the intervals and wrote them on my forearm with a Sharpie, a string of dots and dashes that probably meant nothing to anyone but me. Or maybe it was exactly what it looked like, a beacon in a code we were all born understanding if we'd only admit it. I wanted to answer it with anything I had. Flashlight?
Fire. The human voice bent into the night and set on repeat, but the rules I had made kept my mouth shut and my hands smart.
I recorded the sequence with the little red eye. After it passed a fourth time, the night went back to being only night, back inside. Kit looked at me like you look at someone who has come back from a date with a stranger and is trying not to smile. "It's real," I said. Kit nodded.
"It's something." "That's what real is now," I said. "Something." We set watches.
When it was Kit's turn to sleep, they did it like a person who could sleep anywhere because anywhere was better than the place inside their head. When it was mine, I watched the dark do its slow magic, turning objects into ideas and then back into objects. Mace woke twice and raised their head and sniffed and decided not to be scared. The last thing before I let sleep trick me, I spoke a new rule into the recorder and let it sit next to the old ones like a card added to a deck. Rule 19. Hope is a tool. Use it like any other.
Sharpen it.
Don't wave it around recklessly. Don't leave it in the rain. We were moving toward a ridge I hadn't seen yet, called by a light that could be a sanctuary or an appetite with a better disguise. The difference mattered and didn't. In the morning, we'd go north. We would go because we needed to, because direction is a religion when maps forget how to behave, because the river asked us to keep it company a little longer, because the dog looked at me like I had tomorrow in my pocket. I drifted, the bite finally letting go of my shoulders. Somewhere in my head, a bell that no one had rung echoed once, soft, not warning, just memory. The red light on the recorder winked at nobody but me and stayed lit. The night moved past us like a slow animal doing us the favor of pretending we weren't interesting. Quarantine is a room that's smaller on the inside. The air is full of other people's breathing and your own thoughts doing laps around the ceiling.
Cot 7 was mine.
Cot 5 belonged to a man named Dan who slept like he was trying to fight the bed. Cot 6 was his daughter, Maya, 17 going on fossil, a face carved by the last month into something older than I wanted to see. A nurse, Lila, did rounds with a clipboard and a pulse oximeter that had lived a previous life in a pediatric ward. She tapped thermometers against her palm the way gamblers tap cards. "Mask on unless you're in your own air bubble," she said, pointing to the ragged blue tape on the floor that divided our room into rectangles like a patient, hostile board game.
"Even then, don't make me remind you, we ate by the triangle."
"Not a bell," Mara had said.
A triangle.
Someone had cut it from a length of angle iron and strung it on a nail by the door. You don't strike it so much as you wake it. The sound it made was focused, a tone that reached exactly as far as it needed to, and then decided it had accomplished enough for one day. First meal. Stew with chard threaded through like green lightning.
Bread that tasted like relief. Water with a ghost of chlorine that made my mouth remember swimming pools and municipal laxity.
Lila smiled when she saw my face after the first sip. "We dial dose by eye and test by mouth," she said. "Not as sloppy as it sounds. Chlorine is cheaper than funerals. Rule 21. Tell the truth fast. Bad news is surgery. Cut clean and let it heal. The truth in quarantine is numbers."
Lila measured us 4 times a day. Temperature, heart rate.
O2 saturation when the magic clip decided to work. "Log symptoms," she said, dropping composition books on cots like Bibles.
Headache, cough, nausea, rash, bite, weird dreams, anything.
Don't curate yourself. We decide what matters. Maya's log was neat, each hour carefully recorded, like good grades might earn her father's health back. Dan had a leg wound, laceration, jagged, sutured badly, and then better by Lila, ringed in angry pink. He drifted half awake and half somewhere else. "We were at the clinic," Maya said once, voice low under her mask, the words pinned like butterflies to breath. "We left when the generator lost its manners."
I thought the ridge was a rumor. I ran my tongue along Rule 9 in my head, believe in the possibility of a plan.
The plan was here, but it had hard edges. The no firearms inside rule wasn't an abstraction. It was a room with a steel locker and a sign-out sheet that required a witness and a reason. Guns stayed outside like muddy boots. The rationales were taped up beside the locker. Accidental discharge cost us Rosa 1128. No fights end in body bags when nobody can reach a trigger. If you need force inside, you need 10 people, not one gun. Below in smaller letters, we know this is hard. Do it anyway. The second night something tested the fence.
Not a human. A runner, low and fast and in the after dark, nearly a concept.
It hit the chain link head first and fell away like a smudge. A second later it hit again, hard enough that the echo rattled spoons on shelves. The room went pit-silent. Lila's eyes flicked to the door. 2 guards, later I learned their names were Aaron and Talia, were already moving. They didn't shout. They didn't posture. They lifted tools like arguments they'd had too many times. A hooked pole with a blunted shepherd's curve welded to one end and a spear made of rebar ground to a quiet point. They used leverage and geometry and patience. Hook, trip, pin, a wet sound once, a thud that tried to be an epilogue but wasn't. The chain link vibrated, then settled back into obedience. Nobody cheered.
Nobody booed.
We went back to pretending to rest while the triangle, mercifully, stayed asleep on its nail. Lila's voice cut the quiet. "Sleep, please," she said. "You're not help if you're zombies who can still pass a fever check." It was a joke that landed like a bruise. We slept as if we were trying to convince the room to like us. Day 2 in quarantine, a man across from me coughed, not the productive kind. The kind that announces itself and then lingers like a stranger who likes the view. Lila's head turned with predatory speed. She was on him in 3 breaths, mask adjusted, thermometer as scepter.
"Temp?" Aaron asked from the door. 99.8, Lila said.
"Watch! Isolate!" They put up plastic in the corner like a diorama nobody wanted to visit. Not because they were cruel, because they were careful. The sick man, Brent, talked too much Friday afternoon and not enough Saturday morning.
"It's allergies," he tried on for size.
Panic, unprocessed grief. He had the air of someone who'd read a lot of internet and had decided that credible tones were substitutes for vetting evidence. Lila didn't argue. She gave him water, took his numbers, slid food under the taped flap, and made a note that read, Day 2, probable viral, unknown. Rule 22, care first, decide second, blame never. Blame is for coroner reports and historians. It doesn't keep anyone breathing. Maya hovered between her father and her own hunger. "Eat," I said once, pretense moved aside. "He'll sleep better if you're chewing." She gave me the look children give adults who try to rescue them too quickly. Then she ate, slow, like she was tasting each mustard seed in the stew and building a map from spice. Mara came by at dusk on day 3, eyes that weighed the room for free radicals. "Work orientation tomorrow," she said from the doorway. She spoke to all of us, but her gaze rested on me longer than felt coincidental. "We do quarantine because we care about our capacity as much as we care about you. 5 days, then you work where you're useful. Tell us what you're good at. We'll believe you until reality edits your resume." She turned to go, then paused. "We'll also need volunteers for intake. A quiet approach requires calm hands. Put your name in if you can do calm." "I can do calm," I said, before my inner editor could suggest humility. I thought of the church, of the radio, of the way my hands found wires and asked them questions until they answered. "Good," Mara said, and left. Night 3, the beacon breathed its pattern across my ceiling. Dan moaned once, an old man's sound coming from a man with decades left in him if the world softened. I dreamed I was threading a needle with a piece of rope, and it worked. On day 4, Lila peeled back the tape on Brent's corner and nodded.
"Down," she said, meaning his fever. His relief was loud.
He blew a kiss toward the ceiling and whispered, "Told you," to no one but himself. Lila's eyebrow did the kind of lift that could have shredded paper. We still don't know what it was, she said. And we still don't know if you're generous enough to share it. Keep your mask on and your ego in your box. Rule 23. If you have to be right quietly. The world is loud enough. By day 5, I knew the names of my room by their breathing. The snorer named Tom with a bent septum. The woman named Deja who hummed in her sleep, little airplane noises that reminded me of childhood and medication schedules. The sound of my own breath returning to a pace that was not an emergency. On the morning of my 5th day, Maya asked me if they'd let her sleep next to her father once we were moved to the main hall. Rules, she said, like they might be something you could bargain at the door.
I'll trade socks. You'll probably be allowed, I said. I don't know. I wanted to promise. I have stopped wanting to be a liar. Everybody here, she said, glancing at the pink gauze around her father's leg. Seems like they know what they're doing. They do, I said.
They also make it up. The trick is you make it up together. Her eyes softened a notch. You sound like a teacher, she said. I sold radios and gum at a register, I said. I'm learning as fast as I can. Chapter 10. The plant work smells like purpose. After 5 days, the door opened to the rest of North Ridge and I stepped into a machine built on patience, sweat, and a calm ferocity that made me want to be useful or else take a vow of silence. Orientation came in the yard near a chalkboard that had
mercifully been washed and written on again.
Names were grouped under headings: kitchen, garden, intake, fence, comms, plant, salvage, clinic, wood. I found my name twice, comms and plant. Mara raised an eyebrow when she saw me notice. We double hat when we have to, she said. You can tell me no if it's a bad idea. I prefer you tell me no before your hands start to shake. Comms lived in a small trailer near the main building. It smelled like solder and coffee I wasn't allowed to drink yet. Inside, a man with hair the color of threadbare denim lounged in a chair with his feet up on a crate. Mark, he said without being asked. Ham KJ7LNA. The letters matter less than the habit. He had the face of a person who had found a new purpose late and was hungry to keep it. I remembered the church bulletin board with the frequency scribbles. I remembered Ham, Mark, written in a determined hand. I saw your name at St. Luke's, I said. Youth room had a CB. I woke it like a dragon. Got you enough to hear, Beacon? His grin was a small lamp. We thought we were shouting into a canyon, he said. It's good to know the canyon can hear. The comms trailer held magic made from trash. A bank of old UPS units sat in a neat row, batteries swapped for deep cycle salvaged from a boatyard, raided in the soft month of October. A patchwork of solar panels bristled on the roof, generous but not loud. A bicycle leaned against the wall with a belt run to a car alternator welded to a frame. If you pedaled, you could charge the small bank enough to bring the beacon shutter up when clouds got flippant. We use GMRS locally, Mark said, tapping a channel list pinned to foam board. Ham for distance when the ionosphere is in the mood to flirt. CB for the ones who can only find 4 letters in a fight. Batteries are rationed. Charge cycles are logged. You crank, you get to talk. I handed over my Pathlight cells and my CB hack.
Thought these might fit your religion, I said. They do, he said softly, running a finger over one of the tiny solar panels like it was skin. You from around here, Avery?
Across the river, I said. Left a mark at a church with blue doors. Triangles and a dot. He upgraded the small lamp to a lantern of expression. We saw it, he said. We've been leaving the same outside gas stations where the pumps didn't cough. We needed to decide what our flag is. Triangles with dots is as good as any. Rule 24, make a language even if you're the only one speaking at first. Sooner or later, someone answers, and now you're a people. The plant was a complex of concrete and pipes below the dam's shoulder. Rafi met me at the door, late 50s, eyes wrinkled by both laughter and considerations, a forearm tattoo of a hummingbird mid-sip, which I admired and he pretended not to enjoy. "I worked water in my old life," he said. "Now I pray to it, and we keep each other honest." He led me through the steps as if I were 10 and learning to fix a bike. "Intake," he said, waving at where the river shouldered into grates that snared what the world sent, a cornucopia of sticks.
"Reeds, grocery bags pretending to be jellyfish."
The sad, rubbery silence of a basketball, and occasionally a thing you don't look too closely at. We keep it clear. Quiet sticks, quiet gloves, no splashing. Sound gets the runners excited. Morning is worst because night is when the river dreams of carrying everyone home. We moved inside. "Coagulation and flocculation," he said, like a school teacher reciting spells. "We add alum, aluminum sulfate, to make the tiny bits stop pretending to be shy. They clump. Then we flock 'em, gentle stirring like you're convincing a toddler to sleep. Settling basins, let gravity do its boring sacred work. Then filtration, sand and charcoal. Then we taste and measure and we chlorine kiss it just enough to tell biologicals to pack their bags." He said it like poetry, and then walked me past the parts that made it true. Tanks, gates, valves, a click and whine that came from a chlorinator we fed, as if it were a finicky pet. "And the power?"
I asked. The lights were on.
Pumps turned. Cowardice in me whispered generator, as if that were betrayal. 3 hours of generator during prep, he said. Run the system to move the water where it has to go. Pump under cover of the spillway's noise. People up top time hammering to the spill when we must. We transformed a white noise problem into camouflage. For the rest, we run gravity-fed as far as possible and pedal what we must when the soft juice dies. Soft juice? Grid, he said. Once upon a time, electricity came from walls like a polite ghost.
I miss the ghost.
I prefer the truth. The first day I shadowed Raffi. The second, I pulled the intake duty rope through the glove sections and felt the river tell my shoulders how small I was. On the third, I went out with Talia on the grate. Talia had the calm of someone whose life had already been explained to her by a greater violence and had decided it owed her less surprise from now on. We moved like egrets, slow and precise, clearing reeds and trash in deliberate, silent rhythm. The harness line clipped twice at my belt, redundancy as fashion. While we worked, each step tested before my weight offered commitment. I was thinking about nothing and everything when a shape slipped from the culvert mouth onto the concrete lip above the channel. A runner who had learned to wait. Patience is the new predation.
It didn't scream. It didn't thrash.
It slid, hungry physics, and launched.
I did not think.
I drop-stepped, the way you keep yourself on your feet when the ground decides to be a suggestion. The runner hit where I had been and clawed into the grate with a noise that was almost language. Talia didn't shout. She hooked its ankle with the shepherd's curve and yanked hard. It fell, leg at the wrong hinge, and I brought the flat of my pike pole down onto its skull, once, twice, the second blow a commitment. The body slid like a bad idea back into the intake's mouth. For a second I felt like a murderer and a savior at once, and then I was just a person again, the river tugging at my calves. We moved to the next section. Work is the kindest eraser. After Talia sat on the concrete and drank water without flourish. "You okay?" she asked. I knew I would have to, I said, and my mouth forgot how to finish the sentence. But I hadn't. "You did," she said. "You will again. You'll also save someone you don't like one day." The math balances.
That's not ethics.
That's maintenance. Rule 25, practice the moves you don't want to need. Your hands can learn kindness and violence both. Teach them both cleanly. By late afternoon, I was wet with a damp that felt like it had been written into my skin.
I stank of river and aluminum and adrenaline.
I stood in the sun until it drew a map in salt on my jacket. We ate at dusk. The stew had beans this time, black, soft without collapse. Someone had chopped dill into the top like confetti at the world's strangest parade. At the table, Mark said, "I picked up a voice 2 towns over. A woman with a grocery store radio and a talent for stubborn. Said they had insulin that was warming its way toward uselessness. Said they had a child." Mara's eyes were the sky just before weather. "Distance?" 8 miles, Mark said. "If we cut the diagonal through the old rail, we could do it and be back by dark if we ride and don't stop to adopt every dog we find." Talia's spoon paused mid-air. "Run us along Maple, 3 pockets," she said. "And the strip between here and there hasn't been quiet. We don't do engines, that's our edge, but 8 miles is 8 opportunities to be wrong."
"Insulin matters," Lila said from the doorway. "It's not food, it's time. For a child, it's everything." Mara looked at me as if I had already been drafted. "Comms lead would be useful," she said. "And someone who can fix a radio with solar garden lights would make me believe in team composition."
"You all meet in the yard at dawn. We'll map, plan, and leave offerings to the gods of caution." After dinner, I found Maya by the fence, looking out at the water tower, pretending not to be a sentinel. "They'll keep him safe," she said, meaning Dan, "while you go." "They will," I said. It's what I believed that hour. It would also be true in the morning, and then, later, complicated. But for now, the truth fast was also the truth real. She tilted her head. "You look like a person today," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was her version of a benediction. We cut wood as if December were breathing down our necks and had decided to be unkind out of principle. Winter is not simply weather, it's a job. The lists bloomed on the chalkboard, like vines, insulation, seal doors, stock fuel, vitamin C, root cellars, socks. Akiko led heat. She had the precise hands of a person who had either been a jeweler or a surgeon, and it turned out the answer was both in a life wearing different shoes. "Rocket mass heater," she said, tapping the cinder block and fire brick as if they might blush. "Small fire, long warmth. Heat the mass. It releases slowly. We build what they'd call a thermal battery if we wanted to make a grant proposal." We scavenged fire brick from a kiln supplier and clean clay from the banks near the spillway. We mixed cob with bare feet in a tub, the soles of our feet remembering something about mud, ancient satisfaction married to contemporary necessity. We laid a burn tunnel, fed it into a barrel that would glow like a quiet moon when we did our work right, and routed the exhaust low and long under the bunkhouse's sleeping platforms. "Hot butt, warm sleep," Akiko said when someone fretted about whether the ducting was excessive. "We love a conductive bed if the conduction doesn't try to murder us." We set CO detectors salvaged from a hardware store and wired to our UPS bank. We burned a dozen small fires before we dared a bigger one, smoke testing every joint, every seam, until the drawer purred and the exhaust smelled like nothing at all. Rule 26. Fire is a citizen only when it's supervised. Treat it like a toddler, with a doctorate, brilliant and prone to kill you if you nap. In the garden, plastic sheeting draped on hoops turned into a greenhouse that made chard smug and scallions cocky. We buried squash in straw, hung onions in nets, and packed carrots into bins with layers of sand as if we were tucking soldiers into trenches. We built a clamp, an above-ground mound, out of straw and soil to cradle potatoes, not because we wanted to be quaint, but because refrigeration is a lie the grid tells you, and the grid was on sabbatical. We salted cabbage and made it squeak under our hands until it sighed into sauerkraut. We canned tomatoes with 2 pressure canners rescued from a thrift store that had dreamed of quilt circles, not pressure equalization charts. We set up a small, still not for moonshine, but for water distillation if the chlorinator decided to sulk, or the river read us a bad chapter. Mara managed people the way Raffi managed water. A little pressure here, a careful vent there, a sense of flow. Not everyone liked the no firearms inside rule. Briggs, the kind of man whose posture had been taught by a recruiter and reinforced.
By identity, argued in a voice that wanted to be kind but had teeth at the edges.
"We live under teeth," he said. "Disarmament is a dare." "It's a dare we want," Mara said. "I sleep better knowing nobody will settle a public policy argument with a twitch." "Policy doesn't bleed," he said. "We do."
"Accidents bleed more," she said. Rosa bled. There was a moment, a tension that made the room feel like a barometric instrument. Then Lila said, "You want to keep your pistol under your pillow like a teddy bear? Do it in quarantine?"
"Out here, hide and seek with bullets isn't a sport we play." Briggs was not a villain. He had his own survival math. He taught the fence crew how to set trip lines that rattled sabers made from old road signs. He showed a kid named Leo how to move without spraying gravel behind his steps like glitter. He still wanted to raid a big box store for ammunition and salt. "We'll take 3 bikes and come back with more power," he said, eyes bright with scheme. "We're dying of restraint." "We're living because of it," Talia said. "Wait for the clinic run to tell us who we are, then we can decide how brave stupid we want to be." At night, by lanterns that would have made a speakeasy blush, people read books to each other in voices like homemade soup. A retired middle schoolteacher named Jan read Hatchet to a knot of teenagers who pretended they weren't listening. Someone played a guitar with 3 strings and turned the missing ones into rhythm. We hung a calendar and exit days in erasable marker, as if that would keep time faithful. Rule 27. Make culture on purpose. Songs, story, ritual. Survival is a technical problem. Living is an art. Maya drew in a notebook with a pencil that had been sharpened all the way down to the metal ferrule. She drew Dan's hands, veins like highways on a road atlas, and then the water tower, and then the beacon. She drew an umbrella and coloured it yellow with mustard. She passed the drawing to me and said, "For luck," and I tucked it into the notebook where my rules lived. The night before we left for the clinic, I lay awake and listened to the bunkhouse breathe. The rocket mass heater sighed. Someone whispered prayers. The beacon blinked through the high window, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, and I found myself answering it with blinks of my own eyelids as if the signal and I had a conversation. We left at dawn when the river and the sky still shared a colour. 4 of us, Talia with eyes that measured distance, Raffi with a small kit of wrenches and a bigger kit of kindness, a scavenger named Jude whose superpower was knowing which shelves in which stores hid the good stuff, and me with radios and a crowbar and too much awareness of my own heartbeat. We took bikes because engines are arguments that call too many witnesses. Tires were soft and then grateful. We pedalled in a line with space between us like commas in a sentence that didn't want to run on. The rails to trails path took us through a tunnel of trees that had decided to blur themselves for our convenience. We wore our masks but pulled them down for air when the world gave us a lonely stretch. We stopped at corners. We downshifted for philosophy. Rule 28. Leave a breadcrumb plan. If you don't return by X, assume Y. Write it, share it, sign it with your stubborn. We had left ours with Mara on the chalkboard. Depart Euro 600, return 1700, latest. Route A, rail path to Maple Crossing, south to Clinic. Route B, River Alley, return if road is teeth. Cash drops. Spare water under bench at mile 3, bolt cutters ill. The hollow of an oak that had already agreed to be helpful, a go bag sealed in a trash bag tied high in a maple like a polite piñata. Mark's voice jittered in my ear on the GMRS earpiece. "Check in," he said, at preset points that felt like friendly toll booths. "Clear," I said. "Sky is honest, road is dull. That's good." He hummed once in that way radio people do when they're holding on to hope with their teeth. The clinic squatted 2 blocks off Maple behind a bus that had been parked sideways in front like it was playing defensive line. The bus was a message. We wanted to keep the world away and didn't have time to learn carpentry. The building behind, it had those high windows that made doctors feel like gods and patients feel like lab rats. A banner hung from an upstairs window with the word "Help," written with a desperation that had taken its time to learn calligraphy. We dismounted 3 houses away and stashed the bikes where chaos might have done it. 2 leaned careless against a fence, 2 half-tilted at a curb. We approached silent, shadows pulling themselves thin. Raffi carried the bolt cutters like a sacred instrument. Jude had a pack that didn't make a sound, and a body that had learned to be a rumor in alleys. Talia's eyes were a weather report that I would always read. We sounded the street with pebbles first, thrown far left, then a little right, then back. A head lifted in a doorway and tilted like a dog listening to a word it only kind of knows. Shambler, not runner. 2 more down the block, making their
imprecise way, like they were in a slow-motion rehearsal for a bad play.
No pack, no sprint. 3 on the left, 1 across, none behind. Talia breathed, geometry as ritual. "The bus?" "Side door," Jude whispered. "Front's blocked from the inside. Tires are already flayed. We can go through the rear service entrance, past the dumpsters." He was right. We slid along the clinic's backside, the smell of old garbage going polite with age. The service door had a hasp and a lock that had not been chosen for its talent. Raffi cut it with a sound that made my stomach twitch. We entered, into a corridor of beige and expired motivational posters. The hallway had a taste, disinfectant over fear. A gurney lay on its side like a throw rug. A child's drawing was taped to the wall. 2 people under a big yellow U shape. "Umbrella," someone had written in a hand that didn't quite trust letters. "Clear?" Mark whispered in my ear like a conscience with a radio. "For now," I said, as if I were talking to the room and the past. We found them on the 2nd floor in pediatrics, which had become a church. 4 adults, 2 teenagers, a child of maybe 9, with eyes that were already tired of adults trying to be brave for her. A woman with grey at her temples and a lab coat that had seen both life and more than we should ask of one piece of cloth stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Singh," she said. "We heard your beacon. We thought it was a rumor." "Everything is," I said, "until we do it twice." "In the fridge," she said, pointing at a dorm-sized unit humming on a battery pack that had been peddled into debt.
Insulin. Ice pack's already sweating.
"We have 8 vials left. We have Lily, who needs them more than all of us. We are out of asthma meds. We learned to make spacers out of water bottles. We have too much resolve and not enough fuel. Runners?" Talia asked, already scanning the windows through the slats of the blinds. "In the mornings," Dr. Singh said, "they sun. In the afternoons, they chase. In the evenings, they collect. We don't know what they are at night because we keep the lights very off." "We brought bikes," I said. "We can carry some of you. We have a cart we can convince into being a stretcher. We need to go soon." Raffi was already lifting the fridge's contents into a cooler, layer by layer like sea and sand, vial, ice, cloth, repeat. "We need to ride in the shade as much as possible," he said. "Heat is a thief." A sound from downstairs cut our list in half, the bus being impatient with itself. Or something being impatient with the bus.
A thump, deliberate.
A scrape that made the hair on my arms announce their union. Talia looked at me and I looked at her, and a whole dictionary of paragraphs happened in that look. We came to do this. We will do this and maybe leave a piece of us here to hold the door open for our hope. We go out the back, Jude said. We open the bus if we can, but if we can't, we go round. They're heavy in the front now. The back alley buys us the chokes and the dips. Dr. Singh turned to Lily, the child with eyes older than mine. You ready? She asked, voice that had practiced 1,000 goodbyes and decided to keep practicing hellos instead. Lily nodded and held up a folded drawing. An umbrella? Big and yellow, the U-shape filled this time with 2 small dots and a triangle between them.
I felt my chest do a very stupid thing and then fix itself.
Who taught you that?
I asked. A lady in a yellow coat, Lily said.
She went past a long time ago. She threw jerky to the dogs and didn't look at them with her mad eyes. I saw the slicker in my head.
I saw the rain.
I saw the day I stood on a roof and decided not to call. For a second I wanted to rewrite it. Then I remembered Rule 4 and the wooden weight of a door, how not opening it had also been a survival act. Maybe my silence had let her get here. Maybe she had taught a child to draw my promise without knowing. Okay, Talia said. Here's our going home plan.
Lily rides with me on the rear rack.
Seat pad tied with shirt, hands around my waist. Dr. Singh, you with Rafi. Jude and Avery run interference. We don't hurry fast. We move on purpose. If we get separated, route B along the river. We don't shout. We make eye contact. If you have to choose between being brave and being steady, be steady. Her voice braided itself into our spines. Mark, I said into the radio, we have 6. We're moving. We'll check in at the bridge by Elm. Copy, his voice said. The beacon is off. The world will not know you're coming back until you arrive. That's how we like it. We moved down the stairs, through the service door, into an alley that smelled amphibious. A shambler at the far end turned toward us with the confusion of a person woken in a house they didn't recognize. We went the other way. The bus groaned as if it had regrets about its angles. We slipped between dumpsters that had been waiting their whole lives to be useful.
On a fence post, something glinted.
I turned my head but didn't stop. Now, Talia said. We mounted. Lily clung like trust. Dr. Singh's knuckles went white. Jude took the narrow space between 2 cars like a letter going into a slot. I flanked, breath counted, eyes inspecting shadows for grammar errors that might be teeth. We didn't outrun anything because we hadn't picked a route for running. We threaded. We shifted weight. We became a sentence composed in present tense and tried not to abuse adverbs. At the corner of Maple, a runner broke from behind a newspaper box that had made itself a home for raccoons. It launched in the direction sound had been a minute ago. Talia's bike tilted, then corrected. My hands decided for me. I threw the small rock I carried in my right pocket, left, hard, clacking off a lamppost metal noon. The runner redirected like a terrible ballet. Jude slid a length of cloth across the path, and the runner tangled, fell, scrambled, came up wrong and then right, but by then we were past. We hit the rail path, and the trees took pity. The cooler hummed in Rafi's pannier like a purr. The air felt like it wanted to help. Somewhere behind, something howled in a pitch I've learned not to decode. We didn't stop until a rusted sculpture of a bicycle in a small park told us we were halfway, and we only stopped then because we had promised we would to any gods who love vows. We sipped, we adjusted. We counted. 6, check-in, Mark said in my ear. Your voices sound like weather I can stand. 6, I said. 2 wheels each, trusting the shade. Don't tell the world about us until we're home. Triangle is quiet, he said. Beacon sleeps. We'll knock it awake when you're at the gate. It would have been good storytelling if a catastrophe chose that moment to demand its scene. It didn't. Not every life-saving trip requires a crescendo. Sometimes it's a duet with breath. Inhale, exhale, avoid gravel, avoid hubris. The bridge at Elm was clear. The water looked like a mirror and a warning. We crossed, the boards under the tires making a music that sounded like history and industry taking hands. At the Ridge Road, we dismounted and walked the last rise because that's how you arrive at a place you want to keep. Slow, visible, respectful. The gate crew had seen us half a mile away. Aaron slid the bolt when our shadows touched the fence. Mara stood behind him with Lila, who did not run, did not flail, did not perform a reunion. She simply reached for the cooler and spoke its temperature as a number, and we all breathed for the first time since leaving the clinic. Lily slid off the rack and stood a second as if deciding how to stand in a place that promised more days. She looked at the water tower and then at the beacon scaffold. "Is it a lighthouse?" she asked. "It is now," Mara said. Rule 29. Let your definitions change when you need them to.
A beacon can be a lighthouse.
A church can be a clinic. A fence can be a promise instead of a threat. We filed through quarantine protocol without ceremony. Masks stayed on. Hands were washed like rituals performed correctly. Temperatures were checked as if numbers could catch lies. Dr. Singh asked for a freezer by the end of the hour. Rafi and Mark argued softly in the language of volts about how to marry a small chest freezer to the UPS bank without making the lights flinch. Jude drew a map of the clinic on butcher paper and labelled the best shelves in town with a lexicon only raiders and librarians understand. Briggs stood in the yard with a man's face that wanted to
argue with reality but had been seduced by facts.
He saw Lily, saw Dr. Singh, saw the cooler, and whatever speech he had prepared snuck away to smoke in the parking lot.
"Tomorrow," he said, not to anyone, and then louder, to all of us.
"Tomorrow we go for salt." Talia tilted her head, and Mara smiled with the half-mouth that had become the community's permission slip for hope.
"Maybe," she said.
"Maybe tomorrow is a day we do something foolish. Tonight we do something right. We eat, and we don't ring the triangle." After lights out, I lay on the bunkhouse platform above the long, warm snake of the heater and listened to the rocket stove exhale. Someone had found a pack of cards and shuffled hope into a deck at the table. The beacon breathed its way across the ridge. I held the yellow umbrella drawing under my palm and felt the paper's edges soften with my sweat. I whispered the rules I'd learned like prayers and made a space in my head for the ones I hadn't yet earned. We chose a morning that promised boredom. The sky wore a plain face. The wind hadn't read the weather's mood yet. The river combed itself and didn't snap at anyone. We layered quiet onto our bodies, the way you layer clothes for cold, one decision at a time. Our team, me, Jonas with hands that could turn stubborn metal into a polite guest, Kenji, whose eyes habitually measured pulses he couldn't see, and Lena, who had the gift of seeing what a thing used to be and what it could be next. Like she read a catalogue of revisions in the air above junk piles. Mara walked us to the gate the way a friend walks you to a train, not to keep you from leaving, but to make sure the leaving knew it was seen. Rook handed me a coil of thin messenger line with a flourish like a magician. "It's not much," he said, "but it talks." M came shyly to the edge of the shade and chalked a triangle with a dot on the gatepost at knee height, a blessing in a language that hadn't existed until we needed it. Mark passed me a folded slip with frequencies and times. "If we break contact, you try at the top of the hour," he said. Then 1:30, then at 53, because that's when the ionosphere has been doing us a favor lately.
"Weird, I know."
"I'll take weird." "Define weird," I said. "Anything that makes hope more conductive," he said. Rule 41, leave quietly. Return loudly enough to be recognized. We moved north-northwest, not along the road, not through a gulch, but over the backs of places that had forgotten their names, behind the old orchard where trees wore bracelets of burlap, below the rail bed where my legs had learned tired, then under a viaduct where pigeons applauded us with rude noises and didn't mean it. We stayed under the threshold of attention, a geography only visible from the height of a hawk's boredom. We reached the line where the ridge shouldered up and the tower pricked the sky like a memory of progress. The structure had been a repeater once, cellular, radio, doesn't matter. Antennas that were grumpy with rust. A ladder whose rungs had opinions about load-bearing. A small shack at its base that wore graffiti like a jacket it didn't ask for. We stopped there the way you stop at a door you're not ready to knock on.
Lena rotated one wrist, and this made me feel safe for no good reason. People who flex before they work have taught themselves how to be here a while.
Jonas tested the footings with his boot. Kenji watched the trees instead of the job, because he remembered how often trouble travels with company. The shack's door was held closed by a hasp that had been secured with a padlock that had been convinced to let go by an old crowbar and a new idea.
Someone's been, Jonas said.
He didn't say when because the answer wasn't in the metal. The inside smelled like dust and arrested plans. A rack of gear sat along one wall, guts exposed, coaxial cables severed, lightning arrestor hanging like a tired tooth. Lena crouched and ran her fingers along a frayed bundle of wire like she was playing a harp. The top isn't talking to the bottom, she said. We can teach them to make small talk. Maybe not poetry. We made our workspace a circle that would be easy to step out of and into. We laid tools where no foot would find them by accident. We checked everything for the kind of voice metal uses to warn you about its intentions. Jonas found an intact ground strap and smiled as if he'd discovered a coin that still had value. Ground is how you apologize to the sky, he said. The ladder, missing two alternating rungs at the bottom like a kid with a gap-toothed grin.
No heroics, Kenji said. He said it to me more than anyone, which I didn't hold against him.
If a person looks like they might be the kind who goes up first, you tell them not to be stupid. Doesn't matter if they are, we rigged a line first. Bowline around the base of the ladder, a loop that would be our humility. Lena ran the messenger line through a pulley we improvised from a block she yanked out of her bottomless bag, and up I went. Slow, 3 points of contact at all times, gloves sticky with new resin from tape. The day narrowed to metal under palm, rungs under boot, breath that could be counted. Rule 42. Climb with 3 points of contact.
If you must hurry, hurry in your head, not with your hands. Halfway up, the tower sang, a low hum that wasn't coming from us.
I pressed my ear to the rail. The wind had found a set of flanges and was playing them like a bad flute. I pictured the thing falling and forced myself to picture it holding. The top platform offered a view of a world that still insisted on being beautiful under the circumstances. The dam was a grey cutout. The river looked tame from this height, as if we'd convinced ourselves of a lie by choosing a perspective. The antenna array was bent at an angle that suggested a winter storm had tried to shake it off like old hair. Coax connectors were rotted. I peeled back a strip of tape and found copper with enough shine left in it to remember current.
Send me the box, I called down, voice clipped by wind.
They sent up the messenger line carrying a small tin with connectors salvaged from a sacrificial stereo. We did what makers do when the store is closed forever. Matched threads that weren't designed to be friends, crimped carefully, wrapped the sins in butyl rubber and tape and a prayer. Try now, I called, squinting through sunscreen and worry. Jonas keyed the hand mic below and counted, the numbers floating up like lazy moths. 5 by 5, Mark's voice said, tiny in my ear where I'd wedged the earpiece. If 5 is generous. But I'll be generous today, I smiled, which made my bottom lip crack, because wind had a way of stealing moisture and refusing to give receipts. Rule 43. Fix what increases your range before what increases your comfort. Signals water walls. Blankets later, on the far ridge, something glinted. Not the heliograph contraption we'd seen before. This was more patient. I ducked instinctively, then scolded my instincts. A glint is a suggestion. Being still is an answer. I watched the hole left in the air by the glint. It did not repeat.
Might have been a bird. Might have been a scope.
Might have been the kind of future you don't look at directly. I finished my wrap, secured the cable to the mast with ties we cut from a bicycle inner tube, a modest genius I owed to Jonas, and started down. Rule 44. When you go up, anchor your exit before you climb. Make your way back part of the plan, not an improvisation. On the ground, we grounded the rack with the salvaged strap and pounded a new rod into soil that sighed and forgave us. We cut back a scrub pine whose branches were too ambitious and watched the top of the tower stop sounding quite so much like a flute. Kenji did a slow circle, paused where the glint had been. "We're not alone," he said, which was neither panic nor news. His hand rested near the messenger bag, where he kept bandages and reality. We buttoned the shack and left it not immaculate. Immaculate draws attention, but accurate. Nature likes to cover our tracks. Hubris likes to clean. We let nature win. On the way back, we detoured to the old quarry where the mirrored contraption had been seen. The ground had gotten complicated there, a story in footprints and drag marks and the absence of small things where small things ought to be. We found a tripod leg, cheap aluminum snapped at a knuckle. We found mirror shards glinting up from weeds. We found nothing else except the knowledge that whoever had been signaling a few nights ago wasn't the patient kind. Rule 45 would come later. For now, I added a fresh line to the private book we all carried in our heads. Do not touch traps you didn't set. Leave other people's chessboards alone. We returned along a different ribbon of quiet than the one we'd left on. M met us at the gate to measure our smiles and count the number of hands we still had. Rook wanted to know voltages, and we gave him enough to make. His eyes widened and not enough to try to reproduce it on his own before.
Dinner. Mark stood in the shack like a man who had been
Given a longer leash on the universe.
"You woke the relay," he said.
I can hear things I shouldn't be able to. Someone 30 miles out told a joke about beans that I hated and loved both. That's civilization. Bad jokes about food. We ate stew with an extra piece of carrot in each bowl like a secret holiday. Snow was a theory. The night beacon blinked like an argument kept and not shouted. The tower had become a point on our map we didn't have to squint to see anymore. I slept with less of my body on edge, which meant the edge moved and waited for me elsewhere. The first snow arrives at night and makes strangers out of roofs. In the morning, everything looked like it had been redrawn by a softer hand. The dam wore a shawl. The yard turned quiet in the way that demands permission before you step in. M's eyes got big like storybook moons. She stuck her tongue out as if it would catch proof. "Don't eat it," Iris said kindly, and M did anyway because kindness is best learned by practice, not instruction. Rule 45. Fresh snow is a tattletale. It remembers who came and who left and what size boots their hunger wore. Our world shrank naturally the way we'd planned it to. We made new paths with a broom first, then boots, then dragged a wide plank like a sled to flatten a route that would be ours and would be the only one we used. We moved along that brush-marked artery like blood, predictable on purpose, so that the unpredictability stayed outside of fences. We posted a sign near the gate. Walk in the old steps. For the same reason you'd use someone else's towel, because it's already been wet and dry and knows how to be both. We stepped in each other's prints to erase any single set. "Crime scene clean," Reese said with a smile so small it felt like a personal apology for an earlier loudness. We swept snow from panels until our wrists ached. Rook's new lantern glowed warm in the shack, a small sun he held like a pet. "I knew the battery wouldn't sulk forever," he said, proud in a way I wished I had more often when I was younger. "We'll make 2 more, he promised. "We'll make 10, Mark said. Ambition is allowed when it glows. We collected snow in buckets, but we did not eat it out of our hands. We packed it into pots and set them near the rocket stove so it could change state politely. The first time you watch snow become water indoors, it feels like a magic trick you could be burned for. We melted slowly rationed heat. The room filled with the smell of warm metal and damp wool. I put my face near the steam as if that alone could fix the dryness behind my eyes. Rule 46. Don't eat snow.
Melt it. It steals heat from you instead of giving it.
Make water into your ally, not your thief. Condensation drew on windows with a fat finger. We cracked vents and learned to live with air that didn't warm just because we asked it to. The rocket stove ticked like a content insect. The quilts we'd hung turned our room into a fort that any child would have been proud of.
At night we slept closer. Elbows apologized and were forgiven.
Breath became a communal endeavor. Cabin fever is a phrase made by people who had enough food and time to invent metaphors. What we had was work and the problem of not being outside. Iris took out jawbreakers from a tin and gave each of us one for when arguments felt inevitable. "Bite and you'll break a tooth," she said. "Let it sit, and the room might change its mind before you do." We rolled hard candy in our cheeks like patience and found that arguments softened in our mouths. Rule 47. When you can leave, leave. When you can't, don't invent exits in your head. Do one small thing all the way, then another. When the triangle knocked twice, we uncoiled ourselves with the slow satisfaction of cats near a heat source. Lena and I took the shovel path to the fence and found the family downriver. Now, just the man. He held a jar wrapped in cloth in both hands, as if handing it to us was more dangerous than not. Inside, rendered fat, a commodity that now spoke like currency. "For your soap," he said.
It's cleaner here than we've ever seen. We traded him lint-free cloths we'd cut from bed sheets that had died honorable deaths.
We gave him a jar of broth that made steam into a scented ribbon. Reese, perhaps because winter had chastened him, perhaps because the fence had taught him quiet, started bringing back things without announcing his intention first. A sled he'd found under someone's porch that pulled straighter than it had a right to. A coil of wire from a car stereo that, when braided, turned into a clothesline that didn't sag even when we pretended not to overuse it. A less loud voice. He talked to me one night while we waited for water to pretend to boil quickly. He told me about having been the person people called when the noise got too loud in their houses. He told me he missed being certain about the law, even when he knew the law had been too sure of itself sometimes. "Circles are better," he said of our meetings, "because they soften the edges of certainty. But sometimes I want corners. It's a problem. Problems can be pets," I said. "They keep you company in winter." He snorted, and the steam made his exhale look like opinion. "I've had worse pets," he admitted. We had a picnic one Sunday, because of the plaque at the pavilion, because of J. Cuellar, because the triangles on the map had taught us to make maps inside too. We spread a blue tarp as our sky. We sat on quilts. We passed pickles and bread that was more proud than fluffy. M set a fork upright in a jar and declared it a flag. We told stories about gardens we would plant as soon as the ground stopped being so stubborn, and no one said the word if. Rule 48. Make holidays out of thin air.
Name them, keep them.
The calendar won't come, save you on its own. At night, I walked the path to the beacon structure and tucked my fingers into the splinters of the rail that were learning our hands. The light blinked its piece of Morse like a stubborn heartbeat. Across the valley, no glint. Snow had taken shine and put it in its pocket like a stolen marble. The cold made my teeth sing an atonal song. I recited rules to myself like charms. I added a new one without saying it out loud yet. Fresh snow keeps secrets until you step wrong. The tin box in the boat had learned our handwriting. The next package arrived on a morning that smelled like pennies. The boat bumped our bank with the politeness of a guest who knows you need sleep. Rook saw it and didn't shout. He ran. Mara opened the tin with the same controlled excitement I'd seen once when a new set of tools arrived at my old job, and for a second we were all mechanics. Inside, a note written in a hand that had been taught to make letters legible for someone Who would be reading them in a hurry? Mid-bend at the willow. Third day from receipt. Cloud if possible. 2 knocks. Friend.
1 long knock, danger. No engines?
No lights. Quiet. N, we wrote back. Understood. Trade salt, soap, rope, small solar, fish hooks. Yes. Flour. Limited. Request. Gauze, povidone, sewing needles, wool socks.
No weapons, quiet? We paddled under trees that leaned, keeping our boat's shadow tucked under theirs.
No one had rowed harder than we did not. We let the current be our co-conspirator. The willow at the mid-bend had fallen into the water a little, making a moustache on the river's face. We slid in behind it, sheltered in a gossip the water was having with its own roots. 2 knocks sounded on the gunwale beyond the willow. We answered with 2. A boat ghosted around, understating its competence. 2 figures, one in a dark knit cap, one with hair in a tight bun that meant business. They wore caution like a uniform, and kindness like a badge you don't pin on until you're asked. No names, the knit cap said, voice low, eyes bright behind fogged lenses. We don't need more ghosts. We like initials, Mara answered, because not saying anything at all can turn into theatre.
I'm M, then I'm N, the bun said.
He's J. We showed what we had without letting desire tug our faces into revealing too much. Salt like snow in jars that would not smash quietly. Soap in wax paper that whispered when you touched it. Coils of rope that wanted to be chores. A single small solar path light, the kind that had become a symphony on our roof, offered like a handshake. They showed us gauze, needles, actual sutures in sterile packets that made Dr. Ortega look like he might propose to the river.
A bottle of povidone.
4 pairs of socks where the heels had been reinforced by someone who loved blisters enough to try to prevent them. We made the exchange an art, basket to basket, boat to boat. No one reached too far. No one leaned. We were the choreography of useful strangers. Rule 49. Trade what you can replace. Protect what you can't. Keep the difference honest. N, who might have been a nurse or had learned to be one because the world demanded it, handed me a folded sheet. We've been marking safe wells with blue cloth, she said. It looks like our work when we drive by. We didn't want to be the only ones who knew. A pencil sketch of a region unfurled, a scatter of circles, each annotated with tested 11, shallow, taste, iron, smell, sulfur. The care made a noise in my chest.
We can pay for this, I said, and she shook her head with violence.
If you pay, it stops being what it is, she said. Just check our work when you can. If we're wrong, don't let us stay wrong. We were almost done, rope for hooks, salt for sterile, when the willow's shadow changed, a pressure in the air, not wind. The glint I'd seen on the tower's day seemed to have grown eyes. G's head turned first, not because he was nervous, but because he trained his attention like a hawk. He breathed a single syllable into the space between our boats. Up, on the ridge, west, they had come back. Not many, but enough to make a shape you could smell in the wind even without being downwind.
No engines?
Light withheld, maybe because they had learned their lesson about our rules, maybe because they had a new teacher. The man from the gate, the one with the empty pack and the rehearsed smirk, leaned on a rock and scanned the river as if it owed him something. We didn't turn into a different scene. We stayed in ours. We did what disciplined people do when the wild arrives. We did nothing that could be mistaken for panic. Mara's paddle dipped and held. The boat slid backward a hair, hugging shade as if it had asked for consent. N and J shifted their weight, so the willow held a kind of curtain between us and the ridge. The world slowed to the tempo of reluctance. "Abort," Mara whispered, not needing to be loud. "We go to ground. We keep the night easy. Rule 50, abort gracefully. Leaving is a tactic. Make it look like nothing, not like loss." 2 knocks, a pause, 2 more, hour later, agreed upon with as few syllables as possible. The boats parted like old friends who always meet again. We drifted upriver first, then slid across and down on the far side where the current wants to gossip with rocks. On a day like that, reconfiguring trust is the work. Back at Northridge, we adjusted our trade protocols without turning them into myths. We shifted the meeting hour. We moved from the willow to the bend that looks like a knee. We added 3 small triangles with dots scratched into a flat stone by the upriver shoal. "Our Mark," Em breathed, delighted that something she had started had learned to walk away from her and still be hers. We made a list of what we owed and to whom, and did not start a ledger that would look like debt. We started a ledger that looked like gratitude.
"They gave us wells," Lena said. "We can give them winter."
We planned a cache halfway between us, a hollow stump that could hold a tin box and a trust we were willing to let the weather test. We included in it a letter to N. We want to fix a grain auger east of the old bus depot.
"Can you spare hands who know grain?"
We can trade wheelbarrows and wire. When night came, the beacon blinked, and no one from the ridge blinked back. Chapter 16. The map. Changes. The repeater tower made our air longer. The first thing we heard because of it that changed us wasn't a joke. It was a voice so tired the static tried to carry it instead. "Bus, east switchback, children, we're stuck." "We're alive." The voice was older, feminine, trained to instruct small bodies, too calm for the words she had to say. Mark made the hand signal we had agreed on for "turn off the part of you that wants to sprint." The room obeyed. He listened through 3 more broken sentences.
"We pushed the seats. We blocked."
"We'll keep them quiet." Then silence, which is worse than noise because you cannot interview it. We didn't clap hands or strap helmets like a movie. We made a list. We chose people who could move faster than their fear. We chose people who would not improvise loyalty to themselves when the plan got interesting. 2 teams, 1 to the high road above the switchback, 1 below.
No engines, no lights.
2 radios, but not to be used unless the plan became incomprehensible without them. A 3rd team, the 3rd kind, is always the one that betrays your sleep, stayed, because the dam does not care that there are children on a bus. Rule 51. A rescue is a geometry problem. Draw it before you move people through it. Mara set the gate team's long gun where it wanted to live, at the threshold of exception. She didn't carry it.
She didn't send it.
She didn't need it to make choices. We staged rope, blankets, water, sugar. Sugar is a friend to shock. We staged patience. Patience is a friend to survival. "Hi, team," Mara said. "Jonas, Reese, me. You go above the curve. You make noise where we decide to make noise. You pull eyes. If it's too sticky, you climb. You do not bring stickiness back down." "Low team," she nodded to Kenji, Lena, and Dr. Ortega, because the body itself is a tool. "You make contact with the bus. You decide who walks, who is carried, who stays until the 2nd wave. You are the 2nd wave, and the 1st? Kenji asked, finding his humor like a flashlight. "Not us," Mara said. "The wind." We moved like we had practiced, even though we hadn't practiced this. The switchback was a hairpin of asphalt that had gone brittle. On the inner edge, the hillside held onto itself with the zeal of a Protestant. On the outer edge, a drop. The bus lay skewed, back half on pavement, front-nosed into a ditch that had not existed until the heavy thing insisted upon it. The door had been opened more with will than hinges. Inside, bodies half-sized, eyes too wide, masks pulled up and down like old-timey curtains across faces, as suggestions of normal fought with airflow and comfort. We had 2 problems: small bodies whose fear would attract the wrong attention if it were allowed too many syllables, and an audience of shamblers farther down the draw, wandering in a pattern that looked like boredom and smelled like a rumor. High team took the slope above the turn. The ground wore Frost's first attempt at tenancy and made our boots whisper insults. The plan was the sound plan we could agree on in 1 minute. Throw sound wide, not close. Draw curiosity away. Keep it moving. Don't make a destination out of your noise. Rule 52. Teach sound where to go. The world is full of ears you don't want to introduce to each other. We tied a cluster of empty cans, mute colours turned to percussion, to a length of line and a stick. We crept sideways along the slope until we were 50 yards past, where we wanted attention to land. Reese, who understood better now that corners are for steering, not declarations, sent the cluster tumbling with a flick, then dragged them through brush and snow so the sound moved like an animal that didn't know it was advertising. The metal sang stupidity convincingly. Down below, the shamblers turned with that little jerk that happens when hunger gets an idea. They moved along a vector we drew for them like kids learning to follow a ruler. We pulled the noise farther than was comfortable. My breath wanted to billow white flags. I put a fist in front of my mouth and breathed through a knuckle. Low team slid to the bus. Kenji's gloved hand on the door was an introduction. "We're here," he said. Which, if you have ever been a person in a problem, is an award-winning collection of syllables. Lena counted heads and extracted numbers like gold from tailings. 9, she said. 4 walk. 3 carried.
2. She looked at Dr. Ortega with a glance that meant both too heavy and too broken.
He nodded. Second wave.
They're stable.
Stubborn counts as stable for the next 15. They moved science. Children have weight like planets. You think gravity is the problem, and then you realize it's the orbit you have to worry about. Iris would have been a better voice to talk them through it. We had Kenji, which meant we had a voice that could be both measured and generous. "We're going to play a quiet game," he said. Quiet game has rules. Rule 1, your eyes go on my eyes, not on your feet. Rule 2, 1 foot in the big footprints. Rule 3, when you want to scream, squeeze your hand. Screaming is allowed in your hand. Up on the slope, our cluster of cans had reached a rocky outcrop, where we had intended to retire it with a dramatic final rattle. It obliged. The shamblers reached the place we'd left sound and
Found none, and did what they always do when...
Their map ends, they made a small circle out of confusion, and then wandered into each other's edges with offended pride. We could have made it back without being seen, except could have is language that carries a seed of smugness, and smugness is wind. One of the little ones, a boy whose eyes looked like a fight he had not chosen, tripped on a lip of frost that had decided to be glass. Kenji caught him with the body sense of a person who has been in rooms where the floor turns into an enemy. The boy's mouth opened into a sound that didn't become one. He squeezed his hand like a good student. He swallowed. At the road, we had staged an absurd thing in the hose of a memory, a wheelbarrow, 2 kids in it, as if this were a garden and we had time. Their eyes were wide above masks that had cartoons faded into suggestion.
Em would have been brave for them if she'd been there. Em was not here. We were.
We made the barrow into a chariot. Reese took the handles. The rest of us made a corridor with our bodies and our breath and our conviction. At the bottom of the switchback, the shamblers paused, then turned.
Then forgot.
Hunger is not a good historian. We got the first 7 into the trees and under a faded billboard that used to advertise a law firm that promised to make you wealthy for the right sort of injury. We made ourselves wealthy with small bodies and small hands that smelled like winter, and fear, and crayons. The second wave was more complicated and therefore more honest.
Pain moved at the speed of protection.
The older teacher, voice from the radio, looked at us like we were children she loved but didn't have time to teach properly. "Do not drop him," she said, of a boy whose leg was splinted with seat belts and pleading. "We don't drop children," Kenji said, and she nodded like he had corrected her pronouns. We lifted pain into a position where it was less of a tyrant and more of a passenger. The bus, stripped of most of its seats to make a barricade, slumped against itself, a small ship run aground.
I wanted to kiss it. I wanted to curse it. I did neither. I thanked it out loud.
Sometimes the inanimate needs to hear the words. On the way back, we passed the place where our noise had been. The cans lay like a snake that had unlearned how to be one. Reese picked them up and pocketed the line, and we all laughed because the sound of metal brush painted by snow was the least dangerous thing we had heard all day. Back at North Ridge, we fed sugar into mouths and patience into ears. The teachers fed thanks into the spaces between. We set aside a corner for small shoes to steam. Em drew a triangle dot beside each pair, a spell for dry feet. Mateo made soup behave like a blanket. Iris told later, cried later, which is the sort of professionalism nobody pays enough for, even when there's money. We used the repeater to relay a different kind of message that night. Not a beacon, not an intake, not a barter. Bus, children, safe, we'll need... We didn't say numbers. We didn't say names. We didn't say how many beds we had. We said that we did it, and let the air carry that for a while. The choice came 2 days later, after the crisis became routine. The teachers, both of them, walked the yard and saw our panels and our barrels and our discipline, and argued quietly, without words. Then one said, the high school, and the other said, we can't hold both. They meant the solar array and the gymnasium and the roof that still took snow like a champ. They meant a place to grow children into roles and a place to grow power into light. They meant casting our circle larger or stronger.
Rarely both. Mara drew a map in chalk.
She drew the dam and torch-marked the ridge and drew the high school with a square that looked both hopeful and arrogant. We don't get to be who we were, she said. We get to be who the river thinks we are. Saeed nodded reluctantly. Panels, he said, as if speaking to himself. Roof water enough to drink if we pipe it smart. Distance? Close enough to regret any miscalculation. Dr. Ortega pinched the bridge of his nose and spoke like a tired angel. Children, he said. Exercise light. A place to be loud. A place to teach them loudness in controlled doses. Fence, Reese said, surprising himself. A second one. Double gates. Choke points.
Elevated lines of sight. It would be a new outpost. A second mouth. A second heartbeat.
A second vulnerability. Rule 53 was born in the space between what we wanted and what we had. Expand only when you can defend.
If you can't defend it, you're not expanding.
You're spilling. We made it smaller. Not a full second camp, not yet.
An outpost.
A place where a third of us could spend days and all of us could fall back to if the river threw a tantrum. Schoolhouse, Em named it, and the name stuck because it had the shape of a good idea, even if we had to sand the corners off later. I volunteered because that's what my mouth does when my feet already know.
I'll go, I told Mara, with Lena if she can stomach the roof.
With Reese because corners. With Rook to fall in love with panels.
And the teachers.
They'll want to make chalk matter. Mara looked at me and weighed me the way a parent weighs whether a child is ready to ride without putting a hand on the back of the seat.
You come back, she said.
Daily, even if it's just your voice on the wire. Even if it's just to tell me the wind is still rude. Daily, I promised. Rule 54. When you split your home, give each half a voice and a path back to the other. The day we moved,
we made it look like a rehearsal, not a relocation.
We carried rope and wire and a bucket of nails that sounded like applause. We carried blankets and books and a triangle that would become the schoolhouse bell that wasn't a bell. We carried a tin of seeds that felt heavier than its ounces. We carried fear in lidded jars. At the high school, the walls still had posters exhorting kindness like a fad. The gym floor squeaked under our exploration. The locker room smelled like chlorine and 10,000 decisions. The solar array on the roof looked down at us like a promise and a dare. We'll have to repaint the lines, Lena said, meaning not basketball, but plans. We set the triangle near the entrance and tied a piece of rebar as its striker. We hung our symbol above the door in chalk we hoped would not wash away in the first thaw, triangle with a dot. We wrote beneath it, quiet, patient, alive. On the first night, I stood under the array and watched snow slide off the panels and into the end of my ambition for the day. I said my name out loud because names are better than coordinates when you're inventorying the fact of being here. Avery, I said to the night. The night did not answer. It rarely does. But if you listen long enough, it will be polite to your listening. The first week at the schoolhouse felt like moving into a house that had been waiting for us with all the patience of brick and dust. We swept the halls with brooms that had survived 3 principals and a dozen fundraisers. We opened lockers and found notes folded into complicated birds. We stood in the gym and clapped just to hear the sound go up into the rafters and come back kinder. We hauled the triangle from North Ridge and hung it by the main doors, a mouth turned to metal that we'd knock instead of ring. M chalked the symbol over the lintel, a triangle with a dot, and added a second dot, small for the children. Schoolhouse version, she said. No one argued with a child about punctuation. Rook fell in love with the roof, predictably and appropriately. The panels sat there like a quiet audience waiting for a rehearsal to turn into a performance. We brushed snow with homemade brooms, cleared ice with spatulas that had once flipped burgers for pep rallies. We re-angled racks so winter light would do its shy best. Rook wired 3 strings of LED lanterns to a battery bank, then turned them on for exactly 1 breath, then off. Just to see, he said, eyes bright. Just to promise. Reese walked the perimeter like a man reading the same sentence 3 times, knowing it would finally come clear. Corners, sight lines, doors that needed bracing, windows that wanted boarding but not blindness. He strung cans along one stretch of fence on a hair trigger and then laughed at himself and took them down again.
No dinner bells, he muttered.
Just lessons. The teachers, Raya and Mag's formal names we learned now that the bus had become a memory instead of a problem, took chalk like they were being handed a ceremonial sword. Raya drew letters on a whiteboard in a script that made you want to learn just to see her write more. Mags carved numbers out of air with her hands, and the kids watched like she was pulling rabbits. They set aside a period each day for quiet skills, knot tying, fire safety without fire, how to walk in snow, how to say your name to a stranger with your feet ready to leave. The students practiced with seriousness because kids love rules when the rules are told like secret magic. I commuted between Schoolhouse and North Ridge every day at first light.
Radio check at the top of each hour, my boots learning the way ice lies.
I carried a messenger pouch and news and the shape of problems so decisions could be made by people who had to sleep sometimes. The repeater tower made the air long enough that even when I couldn't see the ridge, I could hear Mark's voice like a friendly cough.
Oh, 3053, he reminded me once, amused.
9 and 5 are blessed today. Give me a religion that runs on odd minutes, I said. I'll show up with a hymnal. Rule 55. If your home has 2 hearts, teach them to beat in time. Comms before comfort, paths before picnics. The ridge signalers didn't go away. They changed tactics, which is a kind of compliment. We saw their glints farther north now, patient, like a fisherman who has moved 1 bend upstream. We found boot prints at a pullout where a view of the dam could be had for the price of a short walk. The prints told a story of a man trying to stand tall and a second person standing at his side, closer to the ground, reading the world like text. A pair, a leader and a listener. That shape is dangerous and promising both. N and J's boat kept breathing. The mid-bend willow became a congregation point for silent conversations. We traded rope for gauze, soap for hooks, a small solar panel for a small sack of grain that made everyone's eyes go big like cartoons. We met their initials with ours, agreed on knocks and dates, changed both when the air made a new suggestion. Winter sharpened. The wind learned our names and called them at inopportune times. We learned the way cold can fling pain into joints that had previously been unambitious. We took turns sleeping near the schoolhouse stove and woke in the middle of the night to feed it wood like a needy god. The children began to treat the world as if it might not betray them every day, and made a book of triangles and dots, 1 on each page, variations and evolutions. Finn, A boy whose mask always hung a little crooked like a smile that couldn't decide asked me if the dam was a forever thing. I told him that nothing was forever, but that we had learned enough about doors to trust this one for now. He nodded like he was filing that in the right drawer. Raya took me aside one afternoon, chalk dust on her cheek like the war paint of a good fight. "We need sunlight and room to be loud," she said, "or they will only learn quiet. Quiet is a good tool. It's a bad personality." I promised her the gym 3 afternoons a week and a stash of rope ladders in case the loud needed evacuation. She laughed, the sound of wood warming. Rule 56. Teach children volume with a dimmer, not a switch.
Loud is not the enemy.
Undirected is, on the 5th day, we heard a knock that wasn't ours. The triangle at the schoolhouse door sounded once, long. Not the short knocks, friend. Not the 2 and 2, trade.
One long danger.
We froze and then thawed into positions we'd practiced but had never needed. The teachers swept the kids into the cabin, the quilt-hung room we'd turned into a heart, without making it sound like storm. Reese slid into the vestibule. I took up the high landing on the stair with a pole we used for closing upper latches. Rook killed the lanterns without making it a ceremony. Outside, a voice we recognized and didn't trust. The man from the gate. I realized I had never learned his name because he'd been introduced as an argument, not a person. He stood with a second figure, arms held out from bodies like a stage direction. No weapons visible.
No mockery in his posture this time, only a tiredness I hadn't been willing to see before. "Parley," he called, not loud. "On your porch?" No closer. We looked at each other the way a family looks at a phone that just rang at midnight. Mara wasn't here.
She'd taught us what to do when we needed her and didn't have her. I knocked the triangle once, short, our hold, within the schoolhouse, and we went to our porch with our masks and our caution and our posture. The man lifted his cap to show an empty head, a gesture as old as fences. "Name's Cal," he said. "This is Wren." The second figure was a woman with a quiet like a river under ice. She watched more than she spoke. That alone made me give her attention. "We're not here for your gate," Cal said. "We're here because winter is being winter and we miscalculated salt. We need it. And a map that isn't lying. Behind him, in the road, 3 others waited a good distance back, hands in view, breath visible. Reese kept his voice neutral. "You tried to take what you needed by copying our light."
That wasn't a miscalculation.
"That was theft with math," Cal nodded to my surprise. "We did," he said.
Hunger does that to a man's arithmetic.
"Didn't work. You're better at quiet than we are. You're better at being still.
We can learn.
Or we can keep failing noisily."
One gets us dead faster.
Wren finally spoke, voice gravel warmed in a pocket. "Children don't do well without salt," she said. "We've got 2. We can trade. Work, hands, the place where wells run clean at the southern flats. We can mark them blue. We can put away our worse habits at your fence if you keep them away. It would have been easier if they had been purely villains. I would have been less tired. Instead, they were people holding their worst urges by the scruff and asking us to grab the collar with them. Rule 57. When an enemy tells you the truth about their hunger, don't reward them with punishment. Reward them with rules. "We don't do weapons inside," I said, as if reciting a greeting. "You know that?" Cal's smile was small, pained. "You told me twice," he said. "I ignored you. I've changed what I ignore." We traded salt for a promise and a map point. We traded 1 coil of rope for a bag of nails sorted by size like a rosary. We traded a slab of soap for 3 lengths of copper wire wound on wooden spools like ancient telegraph. We took nothing we couldn't afford to lose. We gave nothing we couldn't afford to share. Before they left, Wren looked at the triangle emblem above our door. "Good shape," she said. "Dot in the middle means people matter more than corners." "Dot in the middle means pay attention," Em said. from the doorway, where she had snuck to stand, small and fierce. Wren nodded as if she'd just been given homework she was willing to do. They left without turning their backs on us. We let them because respect is a currency that grows when you spend it. That night on the wire, I told Mara. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she exhaled, long. "We'll move the beacon night," she said, "just in case their hunger wakes up rude again, but we'll hold the door meeting. 2 days, noon, no weapons, 2 voices each side. Bring Wren, leave Cal if he has too much to prove." "Copy," I said, as if I had a badge, as if language could pin duty to a chest. Rule 58. Parley is logistics with manners. Make it noon, make it brief, make it binding on behavior, not belief. Chapter 18. The Gambit parley at noon acted like a spell against temptation. We met at the 3-limbed oak, halfway between the dam road and the bus switchback, a place no one could claim without earning the right. Snow packed underfoot into something like a treaty. We wore masks and plain faces and the weight of our decisions like coats. Wren came. Cal stayed back by agreement, a shadow behind a brush line, posture taut with the energy of a person trying to behave. Mara stood with me, and you could hear the triangle's discipline in her voice even when she didn't speak. Saeed came because water demands a witness. Wren arrived with a man whose grin looked glued on. "Gash," he said, offering a hand. Wren did not. I did not take it. He let his arm drop with an air of having been misunderstood by the world for too long. We drew lines with breath in cold air. "No engines within the bend," Mara said. "No lights at night. You don't knock, you don't enter. You want trade, you make 2 knots in a red cloth on a pole by the cracked culvert. We'll see it. We'll ignore it until we don't." Wren nodded. "We'll mark wells with blue," she said. "We'll stop copying your beacon. We'll learn the quiet knocks. We'll teach our noisy ones to do quieter work." Gash smiled and then stopped smiling when Wren's gloved hand touched his elbow without seeming to. "We want to come in," he said. "We want to see if your bread is as proud as our rumors say." He said it like a joke. It wasn't one. Mara's eyes did not blink for a measured beat. "You want bread?" she said. "We'll meet you halfway. Bring flour. Bring fish. Bring work. We'll trade the smell of our kitchen for the way you knock at our door. That's how peace tastes." Rule 59. If someone wants your table, meet them at the porch first. Hospitality is a road, not a room. We parted without shaking, and this felt right. On the way back, Mara said quietly, "Gash is a match in a dry room." I nodded. "Wren knows where the water is," I said, "and how to pour it. The gambit came that night anyway, because agreements take time to become habits, and hunger doesn't like time. The signal on the repeater. A child's voice, too clear to be accident, thin with fear. "Help! Help! I'm at the willow!" We froze. The room loaded with adrenaline like a spring. Rook looked at me like the world had asked him a question he wasn't old enough to answer. I looked at Mara. She shook her head once. "No engines," she said. "No lights." We went because we were not going to lose a child over principle. But we went wrong on purpose. Not to the willow, the voice had asked for that too neatly. We went a bend above, then cut across through the cane, silent as the idea of a knife. At the willow, empty. No child. No footprints in the thin crust of snow. No broken reed. The river spoke with its usual opinions. Farther down, a shadow that wanted to be a person and didn't want to be seen wanting it. Gash, by the shape of shoulders that wanted to be big. Mara didn't call out. She just lifted a length of rope and flicked her wrist. The end landed in front of me as if the world had offered me a leash. I threw my sound in the wrong place, a rock into brush, far left. Gash turned his head the way you do when a habit answers a question. Wren's voice came from the dark above him, no applause in it. "No," she said. It stopped. He stopped. Hunger growled, muzzled by respect. We left a jar on a rock that caught moon. Inside, salt. On the paper wrapped around it, a message. This is what we look like when we're certain. We don't love it either. We don't answer cries that don't leave tracks. Rule 60. Don't answer the river's echo. Search for footprints before you sprint, after Gash kept away from our knocks. Wren came to a daytime trade alone and bought soap with 3 woven baskets that would outlive all our faults. She didn't apologize for him. That meant more than if she had. Snow fell hard 2 days later. The world narrowed down to stove, shovel, soup, and the sound of wind like old secrets. We hunkered. We fed the stove. We stoked our stories. We passed a cough down our line and then back again until it forgot itself. We slept in layers like lasagna. We lived. Chapter 19. The Ice. That pretends ice does its best to be a bridge. The trick is not to believe it. The cold did what cold does to water, taught it new shapes. Between the gate and the dam, the river gathered into slabs that clicked softly, the sound of a firm handshake. At the spillway, a jam formed, a puzzle of floes and tree limbs that had come down from upstream like lodgers who wouldn't leave. The water rose behind it, slow, stubborn. Saeed's eyes did math I couldn't see. If that goes wrong, it goes very wrong, he said. We could wait and hope the jam clears, or we could unjam it before it decided to turn our intake into a bad equation. We go now, Mara said, simple. Ropes, poles, no heroes. We made a plan that put fear on a leash. 2 teams again, because that's how the world agrees to give you 2 chances. Upstream team would cross to the far bank at a narrower point where stones taught ice how to be braver. Downstream team would approach the jam from the catwalk and do the persuading. A line between us across the river, belays at both ends, a safety in case the ice decided to teach us a lesson. Kenji set up a quick hypothermia kit with blankets and a thermos that smelled like ginger. Dr. Ortega rehearsed the words, gentle rewarming, like a chord. Rule 61. Treat ice like a lyre with a sweet voice. Crawl. Spread your weight. Tie in before you listen. Upstream, Reese went first because corners. He tested with the pole, press, listen, press, then lay on his belly and distributed himself across 3 worlds, water, air, and stubbornness. The ice sang in small complaint, then held. I followed.
Knots at my waist, tied like promises, figure 8 to the harness we'd learned to make out of webbing and humility. Prusik loop on the main line in case I needed to inchworm my way back to being brave.
We moved as if we were in a dance where the choreographer hated us a little. The ice gave under me, a fraction the kind of give that makes you remember every story you ever heard about thinness. We reached the far bank and hauled ourselves up. On our elbows like seals who had made poor career choices, we tied off to a pine whose roots had survived 5 floods and our better angels. Across the way, the catwalk team clipped in. Jonas shouldered the persuader rake like a pike. Saeed wore his carabiners like a necklace no one would call pretty. Lena moved with a care that said she valued all her bones equally. The jam was half wood, half ambition. We poked, we prodded, we pulled. The ice shifted and complained. The flows spoke to each other in a language of shushes. A tree limb shimmied, free, and went under, resurfacing downstream like an otter that had been taught bad manners. Water rose, then subsided in a degree too small and too important. A crack sounded under Reese's belly like a joke about timing. He went still. The ice flexed, then settled, then flexed again. "Don't breathe big," I murmured, because useless advice sometimes tastes like presents. He smiled with one eye. "I'll just stop being human," he whispered. He slid backward an inch, then two. The crack turned into a polite disagreement. We held. Kenji's hand waved from the near bank, a question mark. We answered with a thumbs up we didn't entirely feel. We kept working. The jam gave us one last insult, a flourish of frozen bark to the teeth, and then sighed. The water took a breath. You could feel the whole valley lean an invisible inch. The spillway hummed. The intake screens stopped trying to drink trees. On the way back across, the ice remembered its opinions. Halfway, the world dropped out from under my left forearm like someone had pulled a tablecloth. I went into the elbow, then the shoulder, water up to my neck, not down, not all of me, because the rope and the angle and the kindness of physics kept me in the conversation. It was cold like a dare.
I breathed through a swear and put my chest on the ice like I was proposing. Reese anchored, and I kicked, toes finding a ledge like the idea of ledges had been invented just then.
I rolled onto my back like a half-trained seal and slid into a place where air wanted me again. On the bank, Kenji wrapped me the way a good sentence wraps a bad idea, tight, kind, without moralizing. "Sip," he said, giving me the thermos like an award. Ginger burned my mouth and forgave me at the same time. We let the shivers come. We said their names out loud. "You're shivering because your body's making heat," Dr. Ortega said for the new ears.
That's a miracle. Let it? Rule 62, cold turns speed into error.
Warmth turns air into a story. Move slow.
Rewarms slower. Across the river on the far ridge, a glint, a familiar shape.
Wren raised a hand, not waving, just telling us she was there. Beside her, a smaller figure, not Cal, a kid or a small adult with a posture like a wick. 2 knocks carried across water, dull but readable. "Friend," we replied with 2. "Friend back." They did not approach. Neither did we. The river was enough distance for one day. That night, the dam sounded happier.
Water has moods, and if you live with it, you learn them.
The yard slept like a camp after a fair day's work. We made more tea than anyone needed because abundance is also a signal. We told each other the story of the ice and laughed in the places where we hadn't hours before. On the wire, Mark read us a message relayed from east, a description of the sky and the way the cold had drawn lines in it. "It looks like we used a ruler on heaven," someone had said. "It looks like the calendar remembered us," someone else had answered. We added that to our collection of evidence that, despite evidence to the contrary, we were still capable of noticing beauty. Spring doesn't arrive. It leaks. The first sign was not flowers. It was the sound of water falling from roofs like applause. Snow humpbacks slumped into slush. Children learned the joy of stomping puddles like drums. The dam wore grey instead of white, and the river turned back into movement instead of an idea of it. The schoolhouse thawed into a place that smelled like pencil shavings and cabbage soup and wet wool. The gym echoed with jump ropes and laughter, an unruly chorus that made Mara smile with a softness I had not seen on her face since before my prologue began. The panels caught longer light and shifted our schedules by degrees we pretended were not as important as they felt. We set a day for a bigger parley, and this time it was not just with Wren and Cal. N and J came from the river network, initials pinned to coats by mutual consent. Dr. Ortega attended with his ledger of "not right now" and pencils trimmed down to the hilt. Saeed came with a map, where blue lines connected dots we had learned to trust. Raya and Mag set the children up with chalk outside our circle, with the instructions to draw a map of where Spring should go. They took it seriously. Their drawings looked like plans a river would be willing to sign. We met at the church with the blue doors by design. Some places hold decisions better than others. The blue was more tired than before. It still pierced. Inside, we stood by the whiteboard where I'd once written Avery, triangle dot north, along river. I traced it with my finger and felt silly and holy both. Mara opened with what we had, not what we wanted. Water. A dam that holds when we talk to it right.
A schoolhouse that can teach and shelter. A tower that laughs at distance.
A beacon that's a promise, not bait.
No engines at night. No lights at night.
No firearms inside. No exceptions except for the exceptions we admit and are ashamed of. Wren added, wells like blessings. Blue cloth on safe ones, she said. Grey cloth on maybes. No cloth on no. She tapped a spot near the southern flats. This one tastes like iron. This one smells like leaf and copper. This one is a lie the ground tells when it wants to be helpful. She crossed it out with a small violence. Offered medicine like table salt, predictable, cherished, finite. We can teach stitches, she said. We can trade prep. We can come when you knock twice and whisper, help, into the willow, so only the willow answers. Cal surprised me by speaking second to last and saying little. We'll learn the rules, he said without smirking. We'll keep our corners outside your door. We'll teach our noisy to be useful. Gash was not invited. Gash sulked, probably, somewhere a mile away. The world didn't notice. Rule 63. If your rules make room for mercy and work, keep them. If they only make room for control, burn them and start again. We wrote the rules on the church board in the same marker that had written bake sales and names of saints. We added the one that had only ever been spoken. We do not answer cries that leave no tracks. We underlined the one that made us the people we wanted to be. No weapons inside. We circled the beacon, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Friend, not trap. We added 2 knocks, trade.
1 long danger.
Don't test it. We built the schoolhouse fence stronger and slower and higher because we had more hands and better reasons now. Reese found satisfaction in corners that would keep small bodies inside while still letting them practice being big. Rook built a 3rd lantern and a 4th, and then a string of them, so that if we needed to move at night within the schoolhouse circle, we could do it without telling the valley about our plans. He made a switchboard out of a breaker box and labelled each switch like a poem: cabin, gym, door, roof. M drew triangles on everything that would be improved by them, which turned out to be most things. I returned to the church one more time, alone. The blue doors breathed scuffed prayers. I went to the youth room where the CB had spoken the first welcome that was more than a rumour. I left the walkie pair, hand crank repaired, on the shelf where the foosball table's 3-legged joke still told itself. I wrote on the whiteboard a simple thing that looked like an ending and a beginning. We did reopen. There were losses to mark. The sick woman from downriver, whose cough turned out to be a wrong that kept insisting. The man we buried under a pine whose name we never learned, with a rock marked loved by someone, because I believe that about almost every person I've met. The runner at the fence who reminded us that fences are only as quiet as the hands that tended them. We lit tea lights in the nave because candles are what you give the universe when you ask it to do math and accept that it won't. Spring bled into work. We planted.
Chard again because it forgives.
Beans because they climb toward hope. Potatoes because calories. The teachers turned botany into a spelling lesson: kale, oregano, sorrel, dill. The kids learned to put seeds in the ground with calm hands and to say the names like they were inviting guests. We hung jars from eaves, mosquitoes trapped before they had a chance to be born. Sanitation, Dr. Ortega reminded us, is not just soap. It's seasons. It's standing water that becomes an army if you let it. A week into planting, the repeater brought a sound that wasn't a distress call, wasn't a trade, wasn't a joke. It was a song hummed. The melody had no words, and the voice had no recording quality. It was a human humming, sent into air, because humming is what you do when you don't know the lyrics yet. It lasted 10 seconds. It made the shack at North Ridge warmer by a degree science could not measure. "Someone out there is ready to learn the words," Mark said, almost to his coffee. We let the song hang like a flag no wind could steal. We made our first true festival on a day so unsentimental it was perfect. The triangle knocked 3 and 1 and 2. Our code now for come hungry and come with your
hands. We rolled the rocket stove
out into the yard and put a pot on it that had lived a second life as a planter and was now a cauldron. We made stew with chard and beans and pride. We brought the pickles we'd guarded like currency and put them on a table like we had more of them than we did. Mateo baked bread that stood up under itself with a dignity that made me weep into a rag so no one would have to pretend not to see me. We invited Ren and N and J and the kids from the bus and the kids who had been born before this and the kids
who would be born after if we were lucky.
Cal stood at the fence and then, inside it, unarmed, awkward, catching himself reaching for a habit many times and then not reaching. Reese shook his hand once, a small, quiet handshake that meant more than 2 weeks of arguments. Gash stayed away. The map had changed without him. We told stories. Raya told one about a woman who counted steps on a staircase that had fewer and fewer stairs and still reached where she was going. Saeed told one about water, of course, where gravity fell in love with duty and refused to let go.
Iris told one about a teacher who saved a child's
scream by teaching the child to save it in their hand. Dr. Ortega told one about washing hands and how it's a love letter you write to everyone you will touch that day. I told one about a pawn shop with a window knocked out and a recorder with a red light.
I said my name again for real. Avery, I said.
I thought names didn't matter. They do. They're the dots inside triangles. We painted the symbol on the schoolhouse door in a white that would yellow in rain and still be ours. Triangle with a dot. We painted it small on the lantern switches. We chalked it near the beacon pulley. We carved it on a piece of wood we hung by the river bend where the willow had played at being our accomplice. Rule 64. Write your map as you walk. Leave dots where you stood. Knock gently.
Answer slowly.
Come home. That night, the beacon blinked and 3 figures appeared at the edge of our world. A woman with hair gone silver too fast. A man whose shoulders carried the memory of a uniform that had mattered once. And a kid with a backpack too big and an expression that said, I know how to read. We followed our rules. We kept our patience. We kept what we were protecting and who we were protecting it from clearly separate. We brought them inside. We took their temperatures. We changed their socks. We traded their fear for chores. We showed them where the triangle lived and pointed to the dot.
That's you, Em said, satisfied. Don't move, I recorded, because that's what I do.
The red light winked like a friend at last. If you can hear me, it means the tower still breathes and the river still argues, and the dam is still more stubborn than the weather. It means the triangle with a dot means what we decided it means, even when we aren't there to tell it. It means you can come slow with your hands visible and your breath counted and your hope not broadcast louder than your footsteps. We're here. North Ridge, schoolhouse, the church with the blue doors, the willow at the bend, the triangle with the dot. We knock twice for trade, once long for danger, and 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. When we want you to know we're watching the dark with kindness. We'll be here tomorrow too.